"You're not getting away," Han Li yelled as he abruptly vanished from the spot, only to then immediately reappear before the armored man. A series of spiritual sense chains were wrapped around his arm, and he plunged his hand straight into the armored man's chest. Having sustained such severe wounds, the armored man's speed was severely hampered, so it failed to evade Han Li's grasping hand, and it was instantly rooted to the spot. Han Li pulled his hand out of its body, holding the largest of the 5 white talismans in his grasp, and he immediately sealed it away. The armored man was far more powerful than the other Heavenly Chief Profound Generals, possessing powers that weren't inferior to those of a high Zenith cultivator, so Han Li was naturally very pleased to have been able to subdue it. Right at this moment, the 2 remaining Heavenly Chief Profound Generals pounced at Han Li like lightning, slashing their swords into his body right as he was sealing the largest of the 5 Heavenly General talismans. Han Li's body was instantly sliced into 2, only to then fade away, revealing it to have been nothing more than an afterimage. Immediately thereafter, a pair of hands reached into the chests of the 2 Heavenly Chief Profound Generals, pulling out the Heavenly General talismans inside before prompting sealing them. The 2 remaining Heavenly Chief Profound Generals instantly imploded into specks of white light, while Han Li stowed the 2 talismans away. Only then did Shi Chuankong re-enter the hall as he praised in an earnest manner, "Impressive as usual, fellow Taoist Li. It seems like there's no end to your powers." "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Shi. It just so happens that my spiritual sense secret technique is a perfect counter to these things," Han Li replied with a smile before crouching down to inspect the 5 shattered stone pillars. It seemed that these stone pillars were capable of gathering starpor, and that was why the 5 Heavenly General talismans had been adhered to them to be nurtured. He searched through the wreckage of the stone pillars for a while, then quickly pulled out 5 short rods that were each around an inch in length and around the same thickness as a human arm. Each rod was riddled with engraved star runes, forming what appeared to be a set of star formations. Han Li's eyes lit up slightly upon seeing this. He had already developed a decent understanding of the starpor restrictions in the Sculpture spatial domain, so even though the formations on the 5 rods were quite complex, he was still able to roughly make sense of them. This was a star-gathering formation that was countless times more profound than the star-gathering formation that he had learned from the Origin Realm Temple. Han Li eagerly scoured his gaze over the starpor restrictions on the 5 rods, then pulled out a jade slip and engraved the formations on the rods onto it. He had prepared this jade slip prior to entering the Great Ruins, and it was precisely for this type of scenario. Unfortunately, he had been a little too rough in his destruction of the stone pillars earlier, so the rods had been damaged in many parts, resulting in many of the runes on them being erased. Even so, this set of starpor restrictions was still going to be immensely helpful to him. After recording the damaged formations onto his jade slip, Han Li continued onward with Shi Chuankong by his side. From there, they didn't encounter any further attacks, and it didn't take long before they reached the end of the passageway, where a black staircase that was hundreds of steps tall stood before them. At the foot of the staircase was a glowing, white exit, and a giant hall could be seen through this opening. A string of resounding booms were ringing out incessantly up ahead, indicating that a battle seemed to be taking place inside the hall. "Stay here for now, fellow Taoist Shi. I'll go take a look at what's happening in there," Han Li said through voice transmission. Shi Chuankong knew that Han Li's concealment techniques were superior to his own, so he raised no objections and nodded in response. Han Li immediately channeled his myriad acupoint tranquility technique and snuck over to the exit before peering out into the hall beyond. The previous hall was already quite large, but this one was downright enormous, over 100 times the area of the previous hall. The ground and walls of this hall were all dark green in color, and there were 2 rows of massive stone pillars in the hall, one on the left and one on the right. The 2 rows of stone pillars ran straight down the length of the hall, and even with Han Li's eyesight, he was only just barely able to make out a tightly shut stone gate at the end of the hall. Aside from that, there was nothing else in the hall, giving it a very empty and spacious appearance. At this moment, there were 2 parties engaged in a fierce battle inside. One side were around a dozen crimson humanoid puppets and 3 heavenly chief profound generals, while the other party consisted of 4 people, all of whom were familiar to Han Li, namely Chen Yang, Xuanyuan Xing, Sun Tu, and Fang Chan. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. The crimson puppets were each around 70 to 80 feet tall, cutting extremely imposing figures, and even though they weren't armed with any weapons, their bodies contained tremendous power, and the very space around them trembled in the face of their attacks. Furthermore, they seemed to be very adept at working together, and at this moment, they were standing side by side in a row, unleashing attacks that formed waves of formidable power to prevent Chen Yang and the others from advancing any further. As for the heavenly chief profound generals, all of them were comparable in power to the armored general that Han Li had just subdued, and thanks to their insubstantial bodies, they were unaffected by the waves of power unleashed by the crimson puppets as they attacked Chen Yang and the others at will. It was clear that Chen Yang's group was trying to reach the stone gate at the end of the hall, but they weren't able to make any progress against these puppets and talisman spirits. The puppets didn't pose much of a threat, but the heavenly chief profound general were a huge pain to deal with, and out of the 4, only Sun Tu possessed a bone sword that was etched with black patterns that seemed to pose some threat to the heavenly chief profound generals. The black patterns on the bone sword were releasing rings of black ripples that proliferated throughout the hall, and they had no effect on Chen Yang and the others or the crimson puppets. But as soon as the 3 heavenly chief profound generals came into contact with the black ripples, they would instantly be slowed down significantly. If it wasn't for that, Chen Yang and the others would have already sustained injuries from the heavenly chief profound generals. The 3 heavenly chief profound general were swinging their halberds rapidly through the air, unleashing flurries of white halberd projections that converged to form a large net, which descended upon Chen Yang and the others. Sun Tu let loose a low roar as he slashed his bone sword through the air, and a metallic clang rang out as a giant black sword projection struck the net of halberd projections. The net was instantly sliced apart, but the black sword projection was also destroyed, and the 3 heavenly chief profound generals and Sun Tu were both forced back into retreat. Han Li cast his gaze toward the black bone sword in Sun Tu's hand, with an intrigued look in his eyes. The black patterns on the bone sword were giving off a burst of peculiar sealing power fluctuations, so it was no wonder that it was able to ward off the heavenly chief profound general's attacks. Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Shi, come out and show yourselves. It's rather rude to watch from the sidelines like this, Sun Tu suddenly said as he turned his gaze to the entrance of the hall. Chen Yang and the others displayed no surprise upon hearing this, and it seemed that they were already aware of Han Li and Shi Chuankong's presence. Han Li was quite taken aback to hear this. He had thought that his aura was completely concealed by his myriad acupoint tranquility technique, and Shi Chuankong was currently thousands of feet away. Spiritual sense was severely restricted here, so how had Sun Tu and the others discovered them? After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li beckoned to Shi Chuankong, and the latter rushed over to join him, following which both of them stepped into the hall together. Seeing as they had already been discovered, there was no point in hiding any longer. I'm very impressed that you were able to discover us, fellow Taoist Sun Tu. May I ask how you were able to detect our presence? Han Li asked with a smile. In contrast with Sun Tu and the others, the puppets and talisman spirits were clearly quite surprised by the emergence of Han Li and Shi Chuankong. It's just a little trick that's really not worth flaunting. Seeing as your Green Goat City and our White Rock City have already forged an alliance, why don't we all join forces here? Sun Tu invited with a smile. Our earlier agreement still stands, fellow Taoist Li. The great ruins are fraught with peril, so it would be far too dangerous for the two of you to continue on your own. I'm sure there must be some precious treasures to be found in here, so let's take care of these puppets and talisman spirits, then split the treasures inside evenly among ourselves, Chen Yang said. Meanwhile, Fang Chan was looking out behind Han Li and Shi Chuankong, seemingly searching for something, and a hint of disappointment flashed through his eyes when he discovered that there was no one behind them. Shi Chuankong could tell that these crimson puppets and heavenly chief profound generals were far too formidable for the two of them to deal with, so he was also quite tempted to join forces with Sun Tu and the others. However, he didn't say anything as he turned his gaze to Han Li, clearly content to follow his lead. I'm very flattered that you think so highly of me. In that case, I'd be happy to join you, Han Li replied with a smile after a brief moment of contemplation. Meanwhile, the crimson puppets and heavenly chief profound generals were already pouncing at them again. All right, in that case, let's get rid of these pesky things together. The longer we're delayed here, the greater the chance that something could go wrong, so let's not hold back. If you have any tricks up your sleeve, now would be the time to reveal them, Chen Yang declared. He swept a sleeve through the air as he spoke, and 3 short yellow spears appeared in his grasp, all of which were etched with peculiar lightning-shaped patterns. The 3 spears were then hurled through the air as a trio of yellow shadows, and they displayed incredible penetrative power, piercing through the waves of power unleashed by the crimson puppets, before embedding themselves into the bodies of 3 of the puppets. In the next instant, 3 loud explosions rang out as bursts of white lightning erupted out of the spears, forming 3 balls of white lightning that were each around 10 feet in size. The 3 puppets were instantly torn apart, with their fragments flying in all directions. With these 3 puppets eliminated, the wall of force unleashed by the rest of the puppets was instantly significantly weakened. I'll handle these 3 talisman spirits. All of you can focus on eradicating those puppets, Sun Tu said, then immediately lashed out with his bone sword, unleashing a flurry of black sword projections that fanned out like a peacock spreading its canopy. With Sun Tu engaging the 3 heavenly chief profound generals in battle, Han Li and the others immediately pounced at the remaining crimson puppets. At this moment, Xuanyuan Xing was wielding a pair of black staves, each of which was around 5 feet in length. There were strips of yellow fabric tied all over the staves, much like the mourning sticks used in mortal funerals. All of a sudden, I expelled a mouthful of blood, which split up into 2 before fusing into the mourning sticks, which instantly began to glow black. As Xuanyuan Xing swung his arms through the air, countless staff projections were unleashed, sweeping toward the crimson puppets amid a chorus of ghastly howls. The movements of the crimson puppets were slowed down slightly, seemingly affected by these ghastly sounds. At the same time, Fang Chan inhaled deeply before releasing a burst of white sound waves that erupted out of his mouth and nose before also sweeping toward the crimson puppets. As a result, the puppets' movements were hampered even further, and the waves of force that they were generating were weakened once again. Han Li pounced on this opportunity to fly through the air while lashing out with his white scimitar, unleashing a mountainous blade projection that was over 100 feet in length to strike the opposing waves of force. Shi Chuankong immediately followed suit, swinging his purple staff through the air to unleash a thick staff projection that also struck the waves of force. The waves of power generated by the crimson puppets were already far weaker than before, and an opening was instantly smashed into them by Han Li and Shi Chuankong's attacks. The two of them were ecstatic to see this, and they rushed in through the opening, arriving behind the crimson puppets in the blink of an eye. "Well done, fellow Taoists," Chen Yang yelled in an ecstatic voice. "Once we dismantle these puppets, our work will be almost done." Radiant white light erupted out of his fists as he unleashed a flurry of countless white fist projections that rained down upon the puppets, while Han Li and Shi Chuankong attacked the puppets from behind. At this point, there were only 10 of these puppets left, and one of them, which was clearly larger than the others, suddenly let loose a low roar. Two of the puppets immediately swung around to face Han Li and Shi Chuankong, and while the remaining 8 puppets continued to lash out with their fists and feet, creating a massive net of force that stood in the path of Chen Yang's trio. Ferocious winds swept through the entire hall, preventing the trio from getting any closer. Meanwhile, crimson light flashed over the fists of the 2 puppets that were pouncing at Han Li and Shi Chuankong, and 2 bursts of crimson light erupted out of their fists before plunging into the oncoming storm of blade and staff projections. 2 resounding booms rang out as the blade and staff projections were all destroyed upon impact, while the 2 puppets reached out like lightning to grab onto the white scimitar and the purple staff. A cold sneer appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he tugged forcefully on the hilt of his scimitar while pushing off against the ground with his feet, instantly launching himself up into the air before jumping onto the crimson puppet's shoulder. Before the puppet had a chance to react, he threw a vicious elbow strike into its head, and a dull thump rang out as the puppet's head instantly exploded like a watermelon, sending large volumes of silver fluid erupting in all directions. Han Li then used the shoulder of the headless puppet as a launching pad to send himself flying at the other 8 puppets. However, right at this moment, a white halberd came hurtling at his head from above. The halberd was giving off an extremely sharp aura, leaving a visible gash in the space in its wake. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and the profound acupoints on his legs lit up as he sped away roughly 10 feet to the side to evade the attack. Immediately thereafter, a heavenly chief profound general descended from above to stand in his path. Han Li took a glance in Sun Tu's direction to discover that the latter was already struggling immensely to deal with the other 2 heavenly chief profound generals. A pleased smile appeared on Han Li's face as he darted forward like lightning, reaching the heavenly chief profound general in the blink of an eye. The heavenly chief profound general seemed to have caught off guard by this, but it didn't take any evasive measures as it swung its halberd directly at Han Li's head. An alarmed look appeared on Chen Yang's face as he yelled from afar, "Get out of the way, fellow Taoist Li. The attacks from those talisman spirits can phase through all physical objects, so you can't block them." However, Han Li made no attempt to evade the attack. Instead, radiant white light erupted out of the profound acupoints on his legs, encompassing the entire area in a radius of over 100 feet around himself and the heavenly chief profound general, making it impossible to see what was happening inside. A dull thump rang out from within the white light, followed by the sound of a small explosion, and by the time the white light faded, Han Li was revealed to be on his own, with the heavenly chief profound general nowhere to be seen. Everyone in the hall aside from Shi Chuankong was very surprised to see this. Han Li paid no heed to everyone's reactions as he abruptly vanished from the spot, then reappeared behind the 8 puppets in a wraith-like manner before lashing out with his fists. 5 dull thumps rang out in rapid succession, and 5 puppets, including the largest of the bunch, had their heads smashed to bits, following which their mountainous bodies collapsed to the ground. All of this had taken place in the blink of an eye, and it took Chen Yang's trio a moment to react before they erupted into cheers and pounced at the 3 remaining puppets. Meanwhile, Han Li turned his gaze to Sun Tu's direction, before vanishing from the spot once again. In the next instant, he reappeared behind a heavenly chief profound general before reaching out one hand, and once again, a burst of radiant white light erupted out of his profound acupoints to encompass the heavenly chief profound general's entire body. He wanted to keep his spiritual sense chains a secret from everyone, so he was going out of his way to conceal what he was doing. Sun Tu was knocked back by the tremendous force that had erupted out of Han Li's hand, and by the time he steadied himself, the white light had disappeared along with the heavenly chief profound general. Han Li then turned his gaze to the final heavenly chief profound general, and an urgent look appeared on Sun Tu's face upon seeing this, as the bone sword in his hand began to release radiant black light. Countless rays of black light instantly erupted out of the bone sword, before wrapping themselves around the final heavenly chief profound general like lengths of rope. Immediately thereafter, a beastly roar rang out from Sun Tu's body, and a cloud of misty black light rose up from his bone sword, then transformed into a hazy, black beastie projection that opened its mouth up wide to devour the heavenly chief profound general whole. The black beastly projection then instantly vanished alongside the misty black light released by the bone sword, and Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, but didn't say anything. Meanwhile, the crimson puppets had also been dismantled by Chen Yang and the others, and with that, the battle drew to a conclusion. A slightly tense silence ensued. Everyone had just displayed some of their trump cards, and in particular, Han Li had put on a spectacular performance that had astonished everyone. In the wake of these displays of power, a rather peculiar atmosphere had descended upon everyone. You two really made all the difference, fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Shi. Otherwise, we would have been struggling against those foes for who knows how long, Sun Tu said with a smile, breaking the silence. The tense atmosphere instantly eased slightly, and everyone else turned their attention to Han Li and Shi Chuankong. We just so happened to be passing by, and it seems like the threads of fate have brought all of us together, Han Li replied with a smile of his own. If I recall correctly, fellow Taoist, she was with City Lord Yi, right? The two of you seem to be quite familiar with each other, fellow Taoist Li, Sun Tu remarked. Before Han Li had a chance to say anything, Chen Yang replied in his stead, "That's a long story. Fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Shi are indeed acquaintances, but right now, all of us are working together to reap the spoils in these great ruins, so our individual personal ties hardly matter. By the way, fellow Taoist Chen just mentioned that there are some precious treasures to be found in here. Could it be that all of you have already discovered something?" Han Li asked. Fellow Taoist Xuanyuan and I encountered City Lord Sun and fellow Taoist Fang at the entrance of this altar, and we were all of the opinion that this seemed like quite an interesting place, one that was harboring precious treasures. Hence, we decided to come in and have a look together. However, as for exactly what can be found in here, that's still yet to be seen, Chen Yang replied. Now that fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Shi have also joined us, I'm sure nothing will be able to stand in our way, Sun Tu said. That was quite a grueling battle, so let's take a short rest here before we continue, Chen Yang suggested as he took a glance at the stone gate at the end of the hall. Xuanyuan Xing and Fang Chan were both looking rather pale, and they eagerly agreed to this proposal, taking some pills before sitting down with their legs crossed. Han Li and Shi Chuankong weren't feeling all that tired, but they also sat down to rest, nonetheless. Meanwhile, Sun Tu made his way over to the crimson puppets, then pulled out a black dagger before hacking one of the puppets to bits, seemingly trying to find something. Han Li immediately recalled all of the puppet fragments that he had spotted on the way here, and he sat down to rest, while secretly keeping an eye on Sun Tu. Before long, Sun Tu had completely dismembered the puppet, and a hint of elation flashed through his eyes as he pulled out something before immediately stowing it away. Even though he had acted quite quickly, Han Li was still able to identify that he had pulled out a pea-sized white crystal from the puppet's body. After that, Sun Tu repeated the process with all of the other puppets, plucking out one white crystal after another. Everyone rested here for roughly an hour before setting off again, arriving in front of the stone gate. "If everyone's ready, then let's go in," Chen Yang said. "I can deal with those puppets just fine, but if we encounter more of those talisman spirits, then I'll have to count on you, fellow Taoist Li," Sun Tu said with a smile. "Rest assured, City Lord Sun, I'll be sure to do my part," Han Li replied. Sun Tu nodded in response, then turned to give Fang Chan a look, and the latter immediately pushed the stone gate open before stepping inside, followed by everyone else. By the time everyone had gone through, Sun Tu swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of tremendous force to close the gate again. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he took a glance at the gate, then swept his gaze across the hall that he had just stepped into. All of a sudden, all of the giant braziers hanging from the walls and the ceiling of the hall were set alight in unison, illuminating the entire hall with their bright flames. There was a small basin at the center of the hall, and a strange-looking copper tree was situated there. There were close to 20 branches extending from the trunk of the tree, all of which were riddled with star runes. What was even more peculiar was that there was a statue clad in a full suit of copper armor hanging from the end of each branch, looking much like a series of bodies that had died by hanging. Han Li's brows were tightly furrowed as his gaze roamed up the copper tree, and he discovered a bright pillar of white light at the top of the tree, within which was another crimson key. Shiao immediately turned to Han Li with a surprised expression upon seeing this, and Han Li shook his head ever so slightly in response, indicating for him not to say anything. However, right at this moment, the crimson key on the copper tree suddenly began to glow brightly, and Han Li felt a scorching sensation in front of his chest. The burning heat caught him completely off guard, and he couldn't help but give a muffled groan. "What's wrong, fellow Taoist Li?" Chen Yang asked with a puzzled expression, and everyone else immediately turned to him as well. "I suffered some internal injuries on the way here, and my chest suddenly began throbbing a little, but I'm fine," Han Li explained. Thankfully, the scorching sensation only lasted for an instant before fading away, and the key that was hidden in his robe didn't release any light, so it didn't attract any extra attention. "We seem to be relatively safe for now, so why don't you sit down and take a rest, fellow Taoist Li?" Chen Yang suggested. "If you don't attend to your injuries, they could come back to bite you later." "That's a good idea," Han Li replied with a nod, then strode over to a corner of the hall before sitting down with his legs crossed. Shiao hesitated momentarily upon seeing this, then strode over to his side before sitting down as well. Meanwhile, Chen Yang turned his gaze to the crimson key on top of the copper tree, with a solemn look in his eyes. "This must be the key that you were referring to earlier, fellow Taoist Chen. It seems that by some stroke of fortune, we were forced here by the puppets that we encountered," Sun Tu said with a smile. "Indeed, our efforts have finally paid off," Chen Yang replied with a smile of his own. "There's only one key here, so." Sun Tu's voice trailed off here, but it was quite clear what he was implying. "According to my knowledge, there's more than one of these crimson keys in the Great Ruins, so there's no point in trying to claim any single one of these keys. It would be best if we can find others with the same key and work with them to reap more spoils," Chen Yang said with a smile. Han Li was pretending to meditate with his eyes closed, and he sneered internally as he listened to the conversation between the city lords. Not only had Chen Yang and Sun Tu refrained from mentioning this crimson key to him prior to this, it was clear that Sun Tu was trying to claim the key for himself, by leveraging what he perceived to be his and Fang Chan's superior powers over everyone else. However, he was forced to reconsider after hearing what Chen Yang had to say. Right at this moment, Xuanyuan Xing suddenly interjected. It looks like the things hanging from this tree are also puppets, so it most likely won't be so easy to acquire the key. Indeed, so let's all work together to obtain the key first, Sun Tu said, suddenly agreeable to the idea of working with everyone again. All right, let's get started then, Chen Yang said with a nod, then sprang up toward the copper tree. Sun Tu's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he gave Fang Chan a subtle look, upon which the latter immediately set off for the tree as well. The two of them each landed on a different branch of the tree, and as soon as Chen Yang set foot on the branch, he immediately felt a burst of tremendous suction force act upon him from below, locking him firmly into place. Fang Chan was also in the same situation, and the two of them were suddenly bound to the tree. Right at this moment, a series of star runes lit up over the tree, following which bursts of white light began to spread over all of its branches. Han Li opened his eyes upon sensing this change, just in time to see all of the puppets hanging from the tree beginning to sway from side to side. Shortly thereafter, they began to fall from the branches of the tree like ripe fruits, and in the instant that they landed on the ground, specks of red light appeared in their eye sockets as each of them drew a saber that was strapped to their backs. The sabers had no star acupoints, but they were etched with star runes that were giving off layers of white starlight. The puppets spread themselves out into a line, and aside for the two that had jumped back onto the tree to confront Chen Yang and Fang Chan, the rest were all rushing directly at Han Li and the others. Han Li heaved a faint sigh upon seeing this, then rose to his feet, and another battle ensued. Two of the puppets were rushing directly at Han Li at an astonishing speed, attacking him from both the left and the right as they slashed their sabers through the air. Han Li drew his white scimitar, and his star moon boots lit up, instantly elevating his speed to its peak. In the blink of an eye, he dodged the pair of oncoming sabers before hacking his scimitar against the legs of one of the puppets. A sharp screeching sound rang out as a large flurry of bright sparks erupted from the puppet's body, and even though Han Li's scimitar strike was able to leave a pronounced white mark on the puppet's armor, it hadn't actually been damaged in the slightest. Han Li was quite surprised by how resilient the suit of armor was, and he stomped a foot down onto the ground while channeling his Titan Vajra arts. All of the profound acupoints on his arms lit up, and he grabbed tightly onto the hilt of his scimitar before unleashing another almighty blow. A thin layer of starlight appeared over the scimitar, and in response, the puppet raised its saber above its head to block Han Li's attack. A loud crack rang out as the puppet's saber was snapped into two, following which the white scimitar crashed down onto its shoulder. Unfortunately, much of the scimitar's power had already been expended in the process of shattering the puppet's saber, so it was ultimately only able to slice around an inch into its armor, inflicting no substantial damage. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he attempted to withdraw his scimitar, only to discover that a burst of immense suction force had surged out of the puppet's armor, locking the scimitar firmly into place. At the same time, the other puppet was already rushing at Han Li while swinging its saber at Han Li's lower abdomen, so he was forced to abandon his scimitar and dart back in retreat. Meanwhile, Chen Yang and Fang Chan were still stuck firmly to the copper tree, so they could only battle their puppet assailants with their feet completely rooted to the spot. Initially, they were doing just fine, but as two more puppets entered the fray, they began to struggle. In particular, Fang Chan had already been struck close to 20 times by his two puppet assailants, and his entire body was drenched in blood. However, there was no pain in his expression at all, and his battle intent only seemed to be growing more and more fierce with each passing wound that he sustained. Right as one of the puppets plunged its saber directly at his heart, he abruptly opened his mouth to let loose an animalistic shriek, releasing bursts of semi-transparent sound waves that were visible even to the naked eye. As soon as the puppet's saber pierced into the oncoming sound waves, it was instantly slowed down to a crawl, as if it had been plunged into a wall of wet sand. At the same time, the entire tree began trembling violently from the sound waves, and he and Chen Yang were finally able to free themselves. Fang Chan stepped forward and plunged his hand straight through the sound waves unleashed by his own roar, then grabbed onto the puppet's neck before tightening his grip with all his might. A dull thump rang out as the puppet's neck exploded in his crushing grip, and its head fell onto the ground. At the same time, a thin and intricate white bone spike shot out of Chen Yang's sleeve, then pierced into one of the puppets through a gap in its armor. Immediately thereafter, the puppet exploded from the inside with a resounding boom. Things progressed relatively smoothly from there onward, and it didn't take long before all of the puppets were vanquished. Fang Chan had sustained around a dozen light external injuries, while Xuanyuan Xing had been stabbed through the stomach by one of the puppets, but aside from that, everyone else remained virtually completely unscathed. Sun Tu took some time to treat Fang Chan's injuries, then turned to Chen Yang as he asked, "Who's going to take the key? You are the one with the most advanced cultivation base out of all of us, so the key should go to you for safekeeping," Chen Yang said as he cupped his fist in a salute. "You clearly know more about these crimson keys than I do, so I think it should go to you," Sun Tu countered. "Before we discuss that, I can see that there's a restriction around the key. Do you recognize this restriction? I've never been all that proficient when it comes to dealing with restrictions and formations, so I'll have to trouble you, fellow Taoist son," Chen Yang said in a modest manner. "In that case, I'll do the honors," Sun Tu replied with a faint smile. Yet right as he was about to make his way to the top of the copper tree, the gate of the hall suddenly exploded with a resounding boom before flying toward everyone. Han Li and the others quickly sprang away to the side, and the gate crashed into the copper tree before exploding into pieces. "If neither of you are willing to capture the key, then how about I do so in your stead?" Han Li turned to the entrance of the hall with tightly furrowed brows to discover Qin Yuan, Fu Jian, and the black-robed man by the name of Shiao Wang. The three of them were standing side by side at the forefront, and trailing along behind them were two more figures, namely Duan Tong and a short and portly middle-aged man who Han Li didn't know the name of. But what Han Li did know was that he was an elder of profound End City. "When did you get here? How did you manage to bypass my heavenly star eye?" Sun Tu asked with tightly furrowed brows. "You thought that setting up a mere heavenly star eye at the entrance of the altar would be enough as far as surveillance goes. You must think very little of us, City Lord's son," Fu Jian chuckled. Sun Tu fell silent as his expression darkened slightly. "I would gladly hand over the key to the two of you if you had gotten here first, but isn't it a little unscrupulous of you to come in and try to claim the key after we've already done all of the dirty work and taken care of the puppets?" Chen Yang asked in a cold voice. "I didn't think a smart man like you would be capable of saying something so naive, fellow Taoist Chen. Would you not have done the exact same thing had you been in our place? Don't try to make yourself seem like a saint." Qin Yuan chuckled with a cold sneer on his face. "If you want to challenge all of us for the key, then go right ahead," Chen Yang said as he took a step forward, and Sun Tu also took a step forward to stand beside him. "I'll admit that you do have the numbers advantage, but quantity is hardly going to make up for inferior quality," Qin Yuan sneered. "Get over here, Shikong. Do you intend to betray City Lord Yi?" Shiao Wang asked in a cold voice as his hawk-like gaze fell upon Shi Chuankong. Shi Chuankong remained completely unfazed as he gave Shiao Wang a derisive sneer. Right at this moment, Fu Jian suddenly said, Fellow Taoist son, our two cities have always been quite close. So let me offer you a word of advice. Chen Yang is an extremely ambitious man who's willing to stoop to any lows to accomplish his objectives, and he's already colluding with Puppet City in secret, so choosing to work with him is nothing but a path to destruction. A slightly unnatural look appeared on Chen Yang's face upon hearing this, while Sun Tu's expression remained completely unchanged, and it was unclear if he already knew or if he didn't believe Fu Jian. Right at this moment, Chen Yang's voice suddenly rang out in Han Li's mind. Fellow Taoist Li, City Lord's son, and I should be able to take on Qin Yuan and Fu Jian, while Xuanyuan Xing and Fang Chan can handle Duan Tong and that profound End City Elder. Will you be able to keep Shiao Wang occupied while fellow Taoist she goes to claim the key? My apologies, fellow Taoist Chen, but I plan to stay out of this conflict, Han Li replied without bothering to resort to voice transmission. He then took a few steps back with Shi Chuankong to distance themselves from everyone else. Everyone was caught completely off guard by this turn of events, and they all turned to Han Li and Shi Chuankong with wariness and befuddlement in their eyes. Han Li had always been quite wary of Chen Yang, and he had never regarded Chen Yang as a true ally, so he didn't want to get overly involved with him. Hence, he was naturally unwilling to continue working with Chen Yang, and the best choice for him was to observe from the sidelines. You're a smart man, fellow Taoist Li. As long as you stay out of this, I'm willing to let our past differences slide, and I'll also give you some compensation after all is said and done, Qin Yuan said with an elated smile. Cut the chit-chat, Shiao Wang suddenly yelled, and Fu Jian, Qin Yuan, and the others immediately launched themselves at the copper tree as profound acupoints lit up all over their bodies. Chen Yang was about to try and convince Han Li to change his mind, but he was forced to focus his attention on the oncoming Fu Jian instead, while Sun Tu was challenged by Qin Yuan. The elder from Profound End City grinned as he rushed at Xuanyuan Xing, who he perceived to be the weakest of the bunch. Duan Tong took a glance in Han Li's direction, then leaped up into the air before swinging his enormous right arm down upon Fang Chan from above. Fang Chan displayed no fear at all as he took a step back, then threw a punch up at the heavens in retaliation. All of a sudden, Duan Tong raised his left arm to tug on the bandages around his right arm, and the bandages instantly slipped off to reveal a giant, black arm that was covered in fine scales. There were close to 100 profound acupoints glowing radiantly on the arm, and as it came swinging down, the space beneath it began to crackle and pop, as if it were being compressed to a breaking point. Fang Chan opened his mouth to let loose a thunderous roar upon seeing this, releasing a wave of white sound waves that swept through the air as his fist clashed against Duan Tong's. A fierce battle ensued, and aside from Han Li and Shi Chuankong, Shiao Wang was the only one without an opponent. However, instead of rushing in to claim the key, he remained standing off to the side not far away, seemingly apprehensive of the possibility that Han Li and Shi Chuankong could be putting on an act. After observing Han Li and Shi Chuankong for some time, he discovered that they really were displaying no intention of entering the fray, and only then did he turn a hesitant gaze toward the crimson key above the copper tree. Immediately thereafter, he sprang up into the air toward the top of the tree, but he had only risen up from the ground when a streak of white light shot forth toward him at an astonishing speed. It was a white flying dagger, and it almost struck his temple as it flew past him before embedding itself into the ceiling above. Even though Shiao Wang was able to evade the dagger, he was forced to descend onto one of the copper tree's lowest branches as a result, following which he turned to Chen Yang with a resentful expression. It was Chen Yang who had hurled that flying dagger in his direction just now. However, his top priority at the moment was to claim the key, so Xiao Wang made no effort to retaliate against Chen Yang as he prepared to make his way up the copper tree, only to discover that his feet had suddenly become firmly rooted to the branch that he was standing on. Fellow Taoist Li, have I wronged you in any way? Why is it that you've chosen to end our collaboration at such a crucial juncture? Chen Yang asked through voice transmission while warding off Fu Jian's attacks. I would like to help you, but you're harboring far too many secrets for me to trust you, so I have no choice but to proceed with caution for my own safety, Han Li replied. I understand that I've been keeping too much from you. How about this? You help us secure the key, and I'll tell you everything once the key has been obtained, Chen Yang proposed in an urgent manner. I'm afraid I have no intention of getting involved in this mess, while I'm still completely oblivious to all of the circumstances involved, Han Li replied. Fellow Taoist Li, I can tell that you've already obtained another key, and that's why you're not as eager as the rest of us to secure this one. But have you considered what's going to happen to you and fellow Taoist once all of us are dead, and the others find out that you have another key? Chen Yang asked. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he was quite taken aback by the fact that Chen Yang was aware that he was in possession of another key. However, he then quickly realized that Chen Yang had to have spotted some telltale signs back when the two keys had resonated with each other earlier. Is that supposed to be a threat? Han Li asked as a cold look appeared on HSI's face. Not at all, Brother Li. I'm just pointing out the fact that we are currently interdependent on each other for survival, Chen Yang replied in an urgent voice. A hesitant look appeared on Han Li's face as he cast his gaze toward Xiao Wang. At this moment, a series of profound acupoints had lit up over his legs, sending tremors running through the copper tree, thereby allowing him to free himself bit by bit. All of a sudden, Han Li heaved a faint sigh before springing up into the air without any warning. Thanks to his wingform ascension arts, he was able to tread upon air to reach the top of the copper tree in the blink of an eye, much to the chagrin of Qin Yuan and the others. Chen Yang and Sun Tu both heaved a faint sigh of relief upon seeing this, and they exchanged a glance with each other before launching a fierce barrage of attacks at Qin Yuan and Fu Jian to buy Han Li more time. As soon as Han Li landed on the copper tree, he was also instantly rooted to the spot. Shi Chuankong also flew onto the tree after him, temporarily serving as his guardian. Han Li paid no heed to the suction force acting upon him from the copper tree as he began carefully examining the pillar of white light before him. This formation was somewhat different from the one that he had bypassed to claim the previous Crimson Key, but they were both quite similar in nature, so it shouldn't be a difficult task to overcome this one. With that in mind, he pulled out his star wave pen and began to work. With some experience already under his belt, Han Li was able to work much faster than before, and it didn't take long before his formation was completed. The pillar of white light slowly dissipated, and the Crimson Key fell into Han Li's grasp. At the same time, the suction force emanating from the copper tree completely subsided. Xiao Wang was furious, thinking that he had fallen for a ploy collectively hatched by Han Li and Chen Yang, and he stomped down violently, snapping the branch beneath his feet as he launched himself at Han Li. Meanwhile, Han Li and Shi Chuankong flew down from the tree, and before Xiao Wang had a chance to come after him again, he raised the key high above his head as he yelled, "Everyone, get back! If you try to take the key from me by force, then I'll destroy it right now so no one gets it." Sure enough, Xiao Wang immediately drew to a halt upon hearing this, glowering down at Han Li from the top of the copper tree with a dark expression, while everyone else in the hall also stopped what they were doing and disengaged themselves from their opponents. Haven't you already chosen not to get involved, fellow Taoist Li? Why have you suddenly changed your mind? Fu Jian asked with a displeased expression. Han Li continued to hold the key aloft, and he offered no response. Do the cultivators of our green goat city have to follow your orders now, City Lord Fu? Chen Yang sneered. It appears that we've fallen for their little ploy, fellow Taoist Fu. We thought that they had turned on each other, but that was nothing more than an act to lure us into a false sense of complacency, Qin Yuan said. How dare you? Are you not afraid that I'll strike you down even at the cost of having the key destroyed? Shiao Wang threatened in a malicious voice. Right at this moment, an authoritative voice rang out from outside the hall. That's enough nonsense from you, Shiao Wang. Immediately thereafter, 4 more figures made their way in from outside. The group was led by an unremarkable-looking middle-aged man and a short and well-built elderly man. Neither of them should have commanded much attention, but they did, simply due to the fact that they were Equa and Mistress Liu Hua. Standing behind them were Zhu Ziyuan and Zhu Ziking, and to Han Li's befuddlement, he noticed that as soon as Equi came into view, Chen Yang immediately took a step backward, as if he had something to hide. Welcome, City Lord E, everyone hurriedly greeted. Shiao Wang rushed over to Equi before extending a deep bow, but before he had a chance to say anything, a cold look suddenly appeared on Equi's face as he smacked Shiao Wang to the ground. Shiao Wang hurriedly clambered to his feet before bowing down again, not daring to say anything, while Qin Yuan and the others looked on with fearful expressions. Han Li tightened his grip a little further around the crimson key upon seeing this, and he was carefully observing Equi's expression as considered whether to hand over the key or threaten to destroy it again. Equi's gaze roamed over everyone in the hall, and a hint of approval surfaced in his eyes at the sight of Han Li. He was slightly taken aback to see Shi Chuankong standing behind Han Li, but he didn't display too much of a reaction. However, as his gaze fell upon Qin Yuan and the others, a displeased look instantly appeared on his face as he sneered. You too sure enjoy instigating internal conflicts, City Lord Qin, City Lord Fu. It seems like you're always jumping at the first opportunity to turn on your own allies. Please don't misunderstand, City Lord E, we were only trying to claim the key for ourselves so that we could offer it to you, and in our haste to do so, we got into a slight disagreement with fellow Taoist Sun and fellow Taoist Chen, Qin Yuan hurriedly explained. Is that really what happened, fellow Taoist Qin? Sun Tu sneered. If you had been clashing against puppet city cultivators for the key, not only would I not be displeased, I would have rewarded you instead, but instigating internal conflicts at such a crucial juncture is entirely unforgivable, Equi said in a cold voice. My sincerest apologies, City Lord E, we were blinded by our excessive eagerness to get our hands on the key. Once we return to Profound City, we'll be sure to compensate White Rock City and Green Goat City for our transgressions, Fu Jian hurriedly said. I'll let things slide for now, but you two better make sure to compensate fellow Taoist Sun and fellow Taoist Chen once we leave the Great Ruins. Seeing as the key was claimed by Green Goat City, it can remain in the possession of fellow Taoist Li for now, and no one is to try and take it from him. All of us must work together to claim the most precious treasures in the Great Ruins. Do I make myself clear? Equi declared. No one raised any objections to this arrangement, but right at this moment, Han Li stepped forward as he said, City Lord E, now that you're here, it would be unreasonable for me to hold onto the key any longer. It should be kept under your supervision instead. Perhaps all of you are unaware of this, but there are actually 5 of these keys in total, and only when combined in one place can they open a restricted area deep within the Great Ruins. Hence, having a single key isn't going to be of much use. Seeing as you were the one who obtained the key, you can keep it until we reach the entrance to that restricted area, Equi replied with a smile. Han Li didn't say anything further upon hearing this, and he tucked the key down the front of his robes. The sound of an urgent heartbeat rang out once again, as the 2 crimson keys resonated with each other in front of his chest, and began beating like a pair of hearts. Immediately thereafter, another burst of heat surged out of the crimson key before entering his body, instantly stirring up both the bloodline power and the starpore within his body. In this instant, the profound acupoint on his body that was yet to be fully opened finally burst open. Han Li was ecstatic, and he hurriedly suppressed the energy fluctuations threatening to erupt out of his body to conceal this latest breakthrough. But despite his best efforts, everyone still noticed something and collectively turned to look at him. Han Li's expression remained calm, and in order to divert attention away from himself, he asked, "City Lord Yi, would you be able to tell us exactly what treasure is resting deep within these great ruins?" According to ancient legends, a set of remains that harbor boundless power can be found deep within the great ruins. It's a set of remains with truly miraculous powers, and even just witnessing them can grant immense benefits, EQI replied. The fact that this set of remains was receiving such glowing praise from EQI clearly indicated that it was indeed no ordinary treasure, and looks of longing and greed surfaced in everyone's eyes upon hearing this. At the mention of this set of remains, Han Li couldn't help but think of the sculpture holy remains that Shi Chuankong had mentioned, and he snuck a glance at Shi Chuankong, only to find a cold and distant look on the latter's face. He then turned his gaze to Chen Yang to discover that the latter was currently looking rather concerned. "You know some things, don't you, fellow Taoist Chen?" Han Li asked through voice transmission. After waiting for a short while, there was still no response from Chen Yang. "Is City Lord Yi telling the truth or not?" Han Li asked through voice transmission. "Fellow Taoist Li, I am indeed keeping some things from you, but I'm doing so for a reason, and I can't reveal these things to you right now. Fellow Taoist Chen, you've already threatened me once, and if you're going to continue to keep secrets from me, then I think our collaboration should end here," Han Li interjected in a cold voice. After a brief hesitation, Chen Yang sighed. "Fine, if you must know, then I'll tell you everything. In the beginning, I was actually from Profound City, not Green Goat City. My brother, Chen Lai, and I were both spies under the city lord's manor, and we were meant to be sent out to infiltrate other cities once our training was complete. For our final examination, we were both sent out to assassinate someone, and upon successfully carrying out the mission, we would receive vast quantities of cultivation resources and advanced bodily refinement cultivation arts. However, in a cruel twist of fate, our assassination targets for the mission were each other." Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. Chen Yang paused here momentarily, then continued, "I sent Shiao Wang to monitor us at the time, so we had no choice but to turn on each other, and in the end, I was the one who survived. Your past differences with EQI have nothing to do with me. I can work with you in order to better my chances of surviving in the Sculpture spatial domain, but challenging EQI would be no different from committing suicide, and I won't join you in such a futile endeavor," Han Li said. "Of course, I have no intention of turning on EQI anytime soon. Right now, I'm just like you, fellow Taoist Li, I'm just trying to survive," Chen Yang sighed in a resigned manner. "So was he telling the truth just now?" Han Li asked. "I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. After all, no one has ever found these remains before, but there are indeed legends that proclaim that a set of remains that harbor boundless power can be found deep in the great ruins. It's said that if one can obtain even a single finger bone from the set of remains and refine it into their own body, then their physical cultivation base and the number of profound acupoints they possess will be significantly elevated," Chen Yang replied. Han Li was just about to say something else when EQI suddenly said, "Fellow Taoist Li, seeing as the key is in your possession, let's set off for that restricted area together right away. We can't afford to let the Puppet City cultivators get there before us. If all 5 keys must be assembled to access the restricted area, Surely, the Puppet City cultivators won't be able to go in even if they get there ahead of us, Sun Tu said. The Puppet City cultivators are all adept in the art of puppetry, so they may have some other tricks up their sleeves, Mistress Liu Hua said. A hesitant look appeared on Han Li's face in response to EQA's proposal, and he was hesitating about whether to go or not when Shi Chuankong's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Given that our teleportation tokens are fake, there's currently no way for us to return to the Holy Realm. If there's any place in the Scalptia spatial domain that can take us back, then it can most likely only be somewhere deep in these great ruins. Han Li's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this. Do you have some qualms, fellow Taoist Li? Equa asked in an amicable fashion. Truth be told, I currently have a black tribulation centipede in my body, and that's always been a major threat looming over my head. If something goes wrong, I could lose my life at any moment, and my life may not matter much, but my demise could hamper our profound city's plans, and that would be catastrophic, Han Li explained. A black tribulation centipede, isn't that something that you can get rid of, fellow Taoist Liu Hua? EQI asked as he turned to Mistress Liu Hua. It's a long story. So be it, I'll get rid of his black tribulation centipede, Mistress Liu Hua said with slightly furrowed brows, then led Han Li out of the palace. All of a sudden, Mistress Liu Hua turned around with a dark expression as he said, Did you plan to force my hand here and extort me into removing your black tribulation centipede? Please don't misunderstand, Senior Liu Hua. I only dared to bring up this matter because I heard from fellow Taoist Gu that you were planning to remove my black tribulation centipede after we leave the great ruins anyway, Han Li hurriedly explained. She told you everything already, did she? I should have known, Mistress Liu Hua grumbled. Speaking of fellow Taoist Gu, have you seen her after entering the great ruins? Han Li asked. I'm afraid not. At the time, the situation was very chaotic, and I wanted her to stick close to me, but we were separated anyway. It sounds like you haven't encountered her either, right? Mistress Liu Hua replied with a concerned expression. Rest assured, Senior, I'm sure fellow Taoist Gu is fine, Han Li replied, not directly answering the question. The fact that you're concerned for her safety tells me that you're not some heartless bastard. Otherwise, even if I'm acting under City Lord Yi's orders, I wouldn't have fully removed the black tribulation centipede from your body. All right, let's begin now, Mistress Liu Hua sighed. Han Li could only nod in response with a wry smile. Shortly thereafter, the two of them returned to the hall together, and the threat of the black tribulation centipede was finally lifted. Can we set off now, fellow Taoist Li? Equa asked with a smile. Of course. Thank you for your patience, City Lord Yi, Han Li replied as he cupped his fist in a salute. All right, let's go, Eqa ordered, and everyone began to make their way out of the hall. However, they hadn't gone very far when the entire hall suddenly began to tremble, and countless rapidly widening cracks appeared on its walls, while loose rocks came tumbling down from above. This place is about to collapse. We have to get out of here, Sun Tu exclaimed, and a slight panic began to set in. However, Han Li already knew what to expect, so he remained calm and composed. He took a glance at Chen Yang out of the corner of peripheral vision, and he was surprised to find that Chen Yang was also completely unsurprised and unfazed by this sudden turn of events. Don't panic, EQI said in a voice that wasn't very loud, but instantly instilled within everyone a sense of calmness. There's nothing to be afraid of here, EQI continued with a faint smile, then swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of white light that instantly swelled and brightened upon flying out of his sleeve, transforming into a thick pillar of white light that erupted into the heavens with arcs of white lightning flashing around it. The ceiling of the hall was instantly destroyed by the pillar of white light, and the ground above it was also melted away, causing the entire hall to tremble even more violently. Immediately thereafter, the pillar of white light faded away, and a massive, scorched hole appeared overhead, leading up to the surface. Everyone turned to EQ and awestruck expressions upon seeing this, and a hint of astonishment also flashed through Han Li's eyes as he turned his gaze to Chen Yang. The arcs of lightning within the pillar of white light were identical in aura to the white lightning within the short yellow spear that Chen Yang had used earlier. At this moment, Chen Yang was looking up at the massive hole above with a dazed expression and a slightly pale complexion. However, everything was still collapsing rapidly, and countless cracks instantly appeared around the hole, making it appear as if it were also about to collapse. EQI immediately flew out through the hole, and everyone else hurriedly followed along. Even though most of them weren't able to fly like Han Li, climbing up to the hole in the ceiling was still a very simple task, and in the blink of an eye, everyone had arrived on the surface. The entire altar was still trembling violently, and it didn't take long before it completely collapsed into the earth, leaving an enormous, bottomless crater in its wake. Everyone was standing beside the crater, looking on with dazed expressions, while Han Li began to inspect his surroundings with a hint of concern in his eyes. Countless puppets had emerged in the wake of the previous altar's collapse, and he didn't know if the same thing was going to happen here. While there were many powerful, profound city cultivators gathered here, such a boundless sea of puppets would still be far too much for them to deal with. The same thought had clearly occurred to Shi Chuankong as well, and the two of them exchanged a concerned glance with each other. Sure enough, the ground began to tremble once again, and a wry smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. "What's going on? Is it an earthquake?" As the tremors ran through the earth, countless puppets began to burrow their way out of the ground. These were all crimson humanoid puppets that were very similar to the ones that Han Li and the others had fought earlier, and they were wielding large crimson swords that were giving off a fiery glow. The crimson puppets immediately pounced at the profound city cultivators as soon as they emerged from the ground, and everyone hurriedly formed a circle with their backs facing one another in response. How are there suddenly so many puppets? This was naturally quite an alarming turn of events, but everyone remained calm and collected as they drew their weapons to clash against the puppets. It didn't take long for Han Li to cut down two of the puppets with his white scimitar, and to his dismay, these crimson puppets also had full sets of internal organs and silver fluid flowing in their bodies. The superior craftsmanship granted them far more power and speed than the snake, wolf, and tiger-headed puppets from the previous altar, and with so many of them pouring out of the ground, it was going to be extremely difficult to escape from this place. With that in mind, he took a glance at EQA and Mistress Liu Hua, and he was surprised to see that the two of them were looking quite calm and confident. "Not to worry, everyone, these puppets can be easily dealt with. Fellow Taoist Liu Hua, I'll get you to do the honors," EQA said, and Mistress Liu Hua nodded in response before swiping a hand over his own waist, upon which a gray incense burner appeared in his grasp. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. This incense burner seemed to also be a star artifact, and as Mistress Liu Hua chanted an incantation, a large plume of gray smoke surged out of the burner before rapidly spreading to encompass a huge area in the span of just a few seconds. As soon as the nearby puppets were caught within the gray smoke, their movements were instantly slowed down significantly, while their attacks also became feeble and powerless, but the smoke had no effect on Han Li and the others. Han Li swept his spiritual sense over the puppets within the gray smoke, and he discovered that the silver fluid in their bodies had become far more viscous than before, thereby significantly slowing down its circulation. An enlightened look appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. Everyone was ecstatic to see this, and they hurriedly pounced on this opportunity to eradicate all of the nearby puppets, quickly clearing out a large area. The remaining puppets seemed to be very apprehensive of this gray smoke, and all of them lingered outside the area encompassed within the gray smoke while roaring like wild beasts. Sun Tu exchanged a glance with Chen Yang, then smiled as he said, "Impressive as always, fellow Taoist Liu Hua. May I ask what this gray smoke is? It seems like these puppets are very fearful of it." "It's just a little trick used to subdue these puppets. It can hardly be termed as impressive," Mistress Liu Hua replied in an indifferent manner. Under EQI's instructions, everyone set off once again, and the gray smoke followed them wherever they went, maintaining a safe zone that was close to 10,000 feet in radius around them. With the cloud of gray smoke hanging over them, the surrounding puppets posed no threat at all, and it didn't take long before everyone left the city, then emerged from the entire oasis. Much to everyone's relief, the puppets in this place seemed to be bound to the oasis, so they didn't pursue everyone any further. Even with the protection of the cloud of gray smoke, being surrounded by tens of thousands of hostile puppets was still not a good feeling. EQI seemed to be aware of the location of the restricted area, and after leaving the oasis, he led everyone straight to that crimson river before continuing in the downstream direction. 2 months flew by in a flash, and everyone finally emerged from the crimson desert. The ground up ahead gradually turned from red to black, and the air suddenly became very humid. The starpor in the air was even more abundant in this place, and the earth was dotted with vegetation, forming a lush rainforest. Given the diverse environments that the great ruins had displayed thus far, no one was surprised to see a rainforest here, but there was a cloud of faint black mist permeating throughout the forest, shrouding the entire area in an air of mystery. EQI paid no heed to the change in the surrounding environment as he continued to lead the way forward as if he were taking a casual stroll. It didn't appear as if he were using any special techniques, but he was able to cover a distance of close to 1,000 feet with every single step. Mistress Liu Hua, Fu Jian, Qin Yuan, and Xiao Wang were following along closely behind him, while Chen Yang, Sun Tu, and Han Li were trailing along a little further behind. Everyone remained silent as they trudged through the forest, and the only sound that could be heard was that of their rustling footsteps. Han Li took a glance at EQI, then communicated to Chen Yang and Sun Tu through voice transmission. "Is this restricted area really up ahead, fellow Taoist Chen? Why does this rainforest look so strange?" Not only was EQI tremendously powerful himself, he also had the likes of Qin Yuan, Fu Jian, and Xiao Wang on his side, so Han Li and the others were at a massive disadvantage. Under these circumstances, they were forced to set aside their personal differences to work wholeheartedly together. "I've only heard very little about the great ruins, so I don't know exactly where these so-called remains are supposed to be. However, judging from the increasing abundance of starpor in the air, we do indeed seem to be advancing deeper into the great ruins. In any case, you have a key right now, so we always have some leverage if EQI decides to turn on us," Chen Yang said. Han Li nodded in response, but internally he was still feeling rather apprehensive. "Speaking of the key, there's something that I can't make sense of. According to City Lord E, 5 keys are required to access that restricted area, yet fellow Taoist Li only has 1, but City Lord E hasn't mentioned anything about searching for the other keys. Could it be that he's already gathered all of the remaining 4 keys?" Sun Tu speculated. "Perhaps so," Han Li replied as he took a glance at Chen Yang, who didn't say anything. "I wonder exactly how these keys are used. If City Lord E really does have all 4 of the remaining keys, and these keys are still useful after we enter the restricted area, then we would truly be at a severe disadvantage on all fronts, so we have to proceed with caution," Sun Tu continued. This was something that Han Li had failed to consider, and if this were the case, then that really would be a cause for concern. All the while, EQI continued to casually stroll forward, seemingly completely unbothered by the fact that Han Li and the others were intentionally lagging behind. City Lord E, it's clear that Chen Yang and Sun Tu are up to no good. On the surface, they seem to be obedient to you, but if you ask me, they're most likely already colluding with Puppet City to hatch some sinister plot. I think we should kill them right now so they don't get the chance to turn on us. With your powers, I'm sure you'll be able to kill Li Feiyu in an instant before he has a chance to destroy his key. Fu Jian suggested through voice transmission, as cold killing intent flashed through his eyes. There's no need for that. I trust Chen Yang and Sun Tu not to work with Puppet City. They're only behaving this way because they're apprehensive of me, which is inevitable, considering the situation that we're in, EQI replied with a faint smile. You're too tolerant and benevolent, City Lord E. It's clear that Chen Yang still harbors resentment toward you for what happened all those years ago, so you have to be wary of him. Fu Jian insisted in an urgent manner. There's no need to worry, City Lord Fu. I know what I'm doing. Right now, it's best for us to maintain the peace. If we turn on one another now, that'll only be playing into Puppet City's hands, EQI replied. Fu Jian could only fall silent upon hearing this. With that, everyone continued onward, each absorbed in their own thoughts, and several more days passed by. At this point, the group had already ventured quite deep into the rainforest. The trees in this area had become extremely massive, and the smaller plants had gradually disappeared. EQI had announced to everyone that the restricted area was not far up ahead, and that was a very encouraging declaration. Han Li was trudging through the forest while inspecting his surroundings with furrowed brows when Shi Chuankang asked through voice transmission, "Is there something wrong, fellow Taoist Li? You've been looking rather troubled for a while now." "Something feels strange to me," Han Li replied. "How so?" Shi Chuankang asked. "Why is that despite the vast abundance of starpor in the great ruins, we haven't encountered any scaled beasts on the way here? Shouldn't this type of environment be perfectly suited to nurturing scaled beasts?" Han Li asked. "Now that you mention it, that is indeed rather strange," Shi Chuankang replied with a nod. "Forget it, there's no point in thinking about that now. According to EQI, the restricted area should be just up ahead. Will there really be a way to leave the Sculpture spatial domain further up ahead?" Han Li asked. Pa Kong wasn't the one who informed me of this. Instead, I gathered this information after browsing through all of the information on the Sculpture spatial domain that I could find in our Imperial Scripture Library, so it should be reliable, Shi Chuankang replied. "Rest assured, I do trust you, fellow Taoist Shi, but this is a very important matter, so would you be able to elaborate further?" Han Li asked. "I'm afraid I can't reveal any more information to you on this subject, as it concerns a secret of our Night Sun Empire. However, I can swear a vow to the baleful Holy Emperor that I'm telling you the truth," Shi Chuankang replied in a serious manner. "In that case, I won't ask any more questions," Han Li replied with a nod, much to Shi Chuankang's relief. The group continued onward for almost another day, when a large cloud of crimson mist appeared up ahead. The cloud of mist was extremely dense, and it spread as far as the eyes could see in all directions, standing in everyone's path like a crimson wall. Furthermore, the cloud of mist was churning and rumbling incessantly, presenting a very peculiar sight to behold. Everyone stopped in their tracks and peered into the crimson mist momentarily before collectively turning to EQI. "There's no need to be concerned, everyone. This area is known as the Sulfurous Mist Sea, and we'll be able to see the restricted area once we pass through this place. Not only does the Sulfurous Mist Sea not pose any danger, this is here sulfurous flame blood clouds take shape, so if you're lucky, you may be able to encounter a cloud or two," EQ, I said, as he continued onward without pause, and everyone's eyes instantly lit up slightly upon hearing this. Do you know about this place, fellow Taoist Shi? Han Li asked through voice transmission. I don't, but if this is the place where sulfurous flame blood cloud can be found, then this is a massive opportunity, Shi Chuankong replied as he peered into the crimson mist up ahead with an excited look in his eyes. Visibility is very limited in the mist sea, so take care not to get lost, EQI warned as he strode into the crimson mist, followed by everyone else. As soon as Han Li stepped into the crimson mist, he instantly felt an enormous weight crash down upon him, as if he were walking on the seabed. The crimson mist was extraordinarily heavy. Han Li raised an eyebrow at this sudden change, but this amount of pressure wasn't enough to have much of an impact on him, so he continued onward without a hitch. Inside the crimson mist, visibility was limited to less than 200 feet, and the mist was also very restrictive on one's spiritual sense, limiting his spiritual sensory range to only around 200 to 300 feet. The sea of mist seemed to be enormous, and even after walking for around 15 minutes, there was still no end in sight. Initially, everyone was feeling rather apprehensive, but after walking for a while, they encountered no danger, so they began to relax, and everyone spread out in a line to search for sulfurous flame blood clouds. The only one who appeared to be disinterested in searching for sulfurous flame blood clouds was EQI, and this was a detail that didn't escape Han Li's attention. The fact that EQI was so knowledgeable about the great ruins struck Han Li with a sense of unease. What are you doing, fellow Taoist Li? I know your spiritual sense is particularly powerful, so you should put it to good use and search for sulfurous flame blood clouds as well, Shi Chuankong urged. Han Li snapped back to his senses upon hearing this, then released his spiritual sense throughout the surrounding area. The sulfurous flame blood cloud was a reward reserved for the top finisher in the 5-city martial gathering, so it was naturally something that he also desired. Right at this moment, Chen Yang suddenly shot forth in a certain direction, and Han Li hurriedly released his spiritual sense in that direction upon seeing this. A burst of crimson light shot out of the mist up ahead before being caught in Chen Yang's grasp, revealing it to be a palm-sized gelatinous crimson cloud that was giving off a faint crimson glow. Han Li was quite far away from Chen Yang, so he wasn't able to see him, but his spiritual sense instantly locked onto the blood cloud. The cloud was giving off a burst of extremely potent energy fluctuations that encompassed both starpore and bloodline power, so this was undoubtedly a sulfurous flame blood cloud. Everyone else had also sensed this, but seeing as the blood cloud had already fallen into Chen Yang's hands, they could only reluctantly accept this outcome. There was an ecstatic look on Chen Yang's face as he immediately devoured the blood cloud whole, seemingly worried that someone would try to take it from him. After swallowing the blood cloud, Chen Yang's entire body instantly began to glow with radiant crimson light, and in the blink of an eye, over 100 profound acupoints had lit up over his body, seemingly in an involuntary fashion. An alarmed look appeared on his face upon seeing this, and he hurriedly darted back to conceal himself within crimson mist. Even though Chen Yang had acted quite quickly, Han Li's spiritual sensory range far exceeded that of everyone else, and before Chen Yang was able to back out of his spiritual sensory range, he was able to see that over 260 profound acupoints had already lit up over his body. Not long after Chen Yang vanished into the crimson mist, a string of strange sounds akin to draconic roars and thunderclaps began to ring out incessantly. Before long, a tremendous aura began to sweep through the air in all directions, causing the nearby crimson mist to churn violently. Everyone's expressions changed slightly upon seeing this, and it was clear from the commotion that these sulfurous flame blood clouds truly were extraordinary things. Right at this moment, Both Shi Chuankong and Xuanyuan Xing detached themselves from the group before darting into the crimson mist, while Sun Tu sped away in another direction immediately thereafter, followed closely by Fang Chan. Han Li hesitated momentarily, then also abruptly vanished from the spot. In the blink of an eye, everyone in Han Li's group had disappeared. An eager look appeared on Zhu Ziking's face upon seeing this, and she was just about to leave as well when Zhu Ziyuan grabbed onto her arm to stop her. She was just about to complain when EQA said, "You can search for sulfurous flame blood clouds, but make sure you don't spread out too much in case you get lost. Our main objective is to enter the restricted area, and compared with the holy remains, sulfurous flame blood clouds are all too insignificant." Sun Tu and the others gave affirmative responses from afar, but none of them turned back. EQA's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. "City Lord E, these people must be reined in. They're no longer even respecting your authority," Fu Jian harumphed coldly. "It's inevitable that they'll be tempted to go after something as precious as sulfurous flame blood clouds, so just let them be. Fortunately, there aren't any hazards present in this area, so there won't be any major mishaps," EQA replied. An indignant look appeared on Fu Jian's face upon hearing this, but he didn't say anything further. "If you want to go and search for blood clouds, then you can all go as well, but make sure not to go too far," EQA said to Fu Jian and the others. Fu Jian, Shiao Wang, Zhu Ziyuan, and the others were all ecstatic to hear this, and they hurriedly thanked EQA before departing as well, leaving only EQA and Mistress Liu Hua behind. "You're not going with them, fellow Taoist Liu Hua?" EQA asked. "An old man like me can't compete with those young people anymore. Besides, even though there are no natural hazards present in this area, there's no guarantee that there won't be any backstabbing, so it's safer to stay with you, City Lord E," Mistress Liu Hua replied with a smile. "I suppose that's true," EQA replied with an amused smile before continuing onward, but at a far slower pace than before. "Come to think of it, didn't you say that their sulfurous flame blood clouds are supposed to be quite rare? How is it possible that two have suddenly appeared at once?" Mistress Liu Hua asked. EQA merely gave a faint smile and offered no response. Ali. After traveling some distance into the crimson mist, Han Li stopped in his tracks, then channeled his spirit refinement technique to release his spiritual sense to scour the surrounding area. Close to an hour later, another chorus of draconic roars rang out, clearly indicating that someone had just obtained a sulfurous flame blood cloud, but it was unclear who it was. In terms of spiritual sensory range, Han Li was confident that he wouldn't lose to EQI or anyone else, yet he hadn't found even a single sulfurous flame blood cloud up to this point. A hint of urgency welled up in his heart as he began to pick up the pace while continuing to scour his surroundings with his spiritual sense. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly as he cast this gaze to the right, where he had detected some faint energy fluctuations with his spiritual sense. A burst of white light flashed over his body as he instantly shot forth in that direction. Before long, he arrived at a rift in the ground that was several hundred feet wide and immeasurably long and deep. Those faint energy fluctuations were coming from deep within the rift. Han Li didn't hesitate in the slightest as he dove into the rift, and it didn't take long for him to reach the bottom. There, he spotted two sulfurous flame blood clouds hovering over the ground, bouncing back and forth in the confined area like a pair of headless flies. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he immediately pounced onto one of the blood clouds before grabbing onto it. Yet right as he was about to make a grab for the second one, two figures suddenly crashed down from above, namely Fu Jian and Duan Tong. Both of them pounced at the remaining sulfurous flame blood cloud in unison, but Han Li was able to get there ahead of them. "Hand over the blood clouds and we won't hurt you," Fu Jian demanded with a cold look in his eyes. Han Li paid no heed to him as he stowed the two sulfurous flame blood clouds away before rising up into the air. "How dare you!" Fu Jian was furious as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a streak of black light that caught up to Han Li in the blink of an eye. A loud clang rang out as Han Li blocked the streak of black light with his white scimitar, but right at this moment, a cold sneer appeared on Fu Jian's face, and the single streak of black light abruptly split up into 8 identical streaks of black light before hurtling toward various vital regions of his in unison. Han Li lashed out with his scimitar in response, unleashing 8 white blade projections that swept toward the streaks of black light. At the same time, a layer of bright starlight appeared over his other arm as he swung around before throwing a punch in a certain direction. A string of loud clangs rang out as the blade projections clashed against the streaks of black light to repel them, while Han Li's fist clashed against the tip of a black sword that had emerged out of thin air without any warning. The black sword was sent flying back through the air, while Han Li drifted back in retreat while looking down at a small gash on his own fist with furrowed brows. A look of dismay appeared on Fu Jian's face in the wake of his failed sneak attack. "As opposed to wasting time with me here, I suggest you go try your luck elsewhere, City Lord Fu. Farewell." Han Li cupped his fist in a parting salute, then sped away as a streak of white light, doing so just in time to evade a punch from Duan Tong. Fu Jian stomped a foot down onto the ground to launch himself after Han Li, while Duan Tong followed along in silence. The three of them flew out of the rift in the ground almost at the exact same moment, and Han Li didn't want to engage them in a direct conflict, so he immediately began flying back in EQ's direction. A flash of killing intent passed over Fu Jian's face, and he was just about to do something when a voice suddenly rang out. "Is it not a little unbecoming of a city lord like yourself to pick on a cultivator from my green goat city, fellow Taoist Fu?" Immediately thereafter, Chen Yang emerged from the crimson mist up ahead. It was unclear exactly how many profound acupoints had opened using that sulfurous flame blood cloud, but his ore was clearly more powerful than before. Fu Jian stopped in his tracks as he said, "There must be a misunderstanding, City Lord Chen. We only just so happen to be searching for sulfurous flame blood clouds in this area. Congratulations on the breakthroughs that you've made." Duan Tong also stopped in his tracks as the profound acupoints on his body faded away. "I see. In that case it appears I was mistaken," Chen Yang said with a faint smile. "If there's nothing else that you wish to speak to me about, then I'll be taking my leave now," Fu Jian said as he took a glance at Han Li, then turned to depart with Duan Tong. "Are you all right, fellow Taoist Li?" Chen Yang asked as he turned to Han Li. "It's a good thing that you arrived just in the nick of time, fellow Taoist Chen," Han Li replied with a faint smile. "With your powers, I'm sure you would have been fine even without my intervention, but Fu Jian is a very close subordinate to EQI, so try to avoid any direct conflicts with him unless there's no other alternative," Chen Yang cautioned. After that, Chen Yang took a glance at the front of Han Li's robes, then quickly departed as well, making no mention of the two sulfurous flame blood cloud that Han Li was carrying. Following Chen Yang's departure, Han Li sped away in another direction, and after about 15 minutes, he had arrived in a relatively safe area. Once there, he pulled out the two sulfurous flame blood clouds with an excited look in his eyes. Such an exceptional bodily refinement treasure was undoubtedly going to be highly sought after even in the outside world, let alone in a place as barren and lacking in cultivation resources as the Scalptia spatial domain. However, it felt a little strange to him that something so extraordinary seemed to be so easy to obtain in this area. Perhaps this is why the Great Ruins are such an alluring place to the cultivators of both cities. With that in mind, Han Li was just about to devour a sulfurous flame blood cloud when another chorus of draconic roars rang out from afar, indicating that someone else had found another sulfurous flame blood cloud nearby. Han Li returned his gaze to his two sulfurous flame blood clouds, then devoured them both at once. With someone else refining a sulfurous flame blood cloud nearby, this was the perfect cover for him to do the same thing. In the next instant, his entire body shuddered, following which his skin turned bright red, and the two sulfurous flame blood clouds transformed into a burst of intense heat that spread through his body. It was as if a flame had appeared in his stomach, scorching all of his internal organs to inflict such excruciating pain upon him that even he couldn't help but give a muffled groan, despite his tremendous mental fortitude. He clenched his fists tightly as he fought through the agony. No one had told him that devouring sulfurous flame blood clouds would be such a painful process, and it didn't seem like Chen Yang had suffered anywhere near as much earlier. However, what he failed to consider was that Chen Yang had only devoured a single sulfurous flame blood cloud, while he had devoured two at once. Han Li only just barely had a chance to brace himself before the burst of heat formed by the sulfurous flame blood clouds began to spread through his entire body, making it feel as if all of his meridians were about to be forcibly torn apart. His complexion instantly became deathly pale, but his skin was still bright red, and a series of egg-sized bulges were roaming over his body like living creatures, presenting a bizarre sight to behold. His expression was twisted in agony as large droplets of sweat flowed down his forehead, and his body was trembling uncontrollably. His bloodline power was ignited by this burst of heat, and all of his profound acupoints lit up over his body in an involuntary manner. Despite his immense mental fortitude, Han Li was beginning to fade in and out of consciousness. He was doing everything in his power to protect his own consciousness so that he didn't completely faint, but right at this moment, his heavenly baleful purgatory arts were activated on their own, guiding the bursts of heat to different parts of his body. If he were fully conscious at this moment, he would notice that the bursts of heat were being guided toward the profound acupoints recorded in the cultivation art. A string of loud pops rang out from all parts of his body as the bursts of heat began to invade new profound acupoints that were still yet to be opened. Every time Han Li was about to fade out of consciousness, bursts of excruciating pain would spear through his entire body, forcibly bringing him back to lucidity. Before long, he began to sense the changes taking place in his body, and a hint of elation welled up in his heart. He gritted his teeth against the excruciating agony as he sat down with his legs crossed to channel his heavenly baleful purgatory arts, guiding the bursts of heat toward these new profound acupoints. To his surprise, these profound acupoints put up next to no resistance, and in mere moments, one had already been opened. One profound acupoint was opened after another, and before long, over 20 profound acupoints had been opened in succession. At this moment, there were 263 profound acupoints glowing over his entire body. Right at this moment, the burst of heat wreaking havoc in his body faded away, only to be replaced by a cool and refreshing sensation. The contrast was such a blissful one that he was almost unable to suppress a moan of pleasure, and it took him quite some time to compose himself. The sulfurous flame blood cloud had truly lived up to its incredible reputation. Han Li could scarcely believe that he had managed to open so many profound acupoints in such a short time, but this was the reality. I wonder if opening profound acupoints using sulfurous flame blood cloud will have any detrimental effects. As he was considering this notion, the cool sensation in his body also faded away, and in the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Han Li didn't dare to make any rash moves, and he waited until the bloodline power in his body completely settled down before making his way back to the others. Even though he had left for quite some time, he had made sure to remember the direction that the main group was in, so he never lost his way. At this point, the sea of crimson mist had become far thinner than before. Shortly thereafter, Hanli found his way back to the main group. Perhaps Equa and Mistress Liu Hua had intentionally been waiting for everyone, but they had been making rather slow progress. Aside from Shi Chuankong, Xuanyuan Xing, Fu Jian and Duan Tong, everyone else had already returned. Eqi displayed no reaction to Han Li's return, while Mistress Liu Hua took a glance at him, only to quickly turn away again. "You're finally back, fellow Taoist Li. I can tell that you've made some significant strides," Chen Yang said as he approached Han Li. "I made some decent progress," Han Li replied in an ambiguous manner. "That's good to hear, but don't get complacent. I've heard that Zhu Ziyuan and Zhu Ziqing have also obtained sulfurous flame blood clouds. In particular, Zhu Ziyuan was very formidable to begin with. And now that he's obtained a sulfurous flame blood cloud, the situation is not looking good for us," Chen Yang said through voice transmission. Han Li cast his gaze toward Zhu Ziyuan upon hearing this, but the latter's gaze remained fixed up ahead with a look of focus in his eyes. "Fellow Taoist Shi and fellow Taoist Xuanyuan still aren't back yet. Fu Jian and Duan Tong haven't returned either. Is it possible that they've run into one another?" Han Li asked through voice transmission. "I don't think that's very likely. Fellow Taoist Shi and fellow Taoist Xuanyuan were among the first people to leave, so perhaps they've gone exploring somewhere far away," Chen Yang replied in an unconcerned manner. Han Li was still a little worried about Shi Chuankong, but he didn't say anything further. Thankfully, it didn't take long before Shi Chuankong and Xuanyuan Xing returned to the group, and both of them were looking rather depressed, clearly having failed to secure any sulfurous flame blood clouds. Shortly thereafter, Fu Jian and Duan Tong also returned. Judging from their reactions, their luck hadn't been much better, and an angry look flashed through their eyes as they glanced at Han Li, who paid no heed to their hostilities. At this point, everyone had already returned to the group, and thus, Eqi picked up the pace. After walking for close to another 3 hours, the surrounding crimson mist finally completely faded away, revealing an undulating mountain range up ahead. The mountain range was enormous, stretching as far as the eyes could see, and the mountains within it were completely barren and devoid of vegetation, presenting a completely different environment from the rainforest that the group had just emerged from. What was most strange of all was that the entire mountain range was crimson in color, and there were several crimson rivers flowing between the mountains, as well as a sweet aroma of blood in the air. Eqi continued onward without pause, leading the way into the mountain range, and after crossing over several mountains, everyone arrived before a giant basin. Several large rivers came together here, and an enormous crimson palace was standing at the point where the rivers were connected. The palace wasn't much shorter than the nearby mountains, and it was dozens of kilometers in area, resembling a gargantuan crimson beast prowling in the basin. The construction of the palace displayed exceptional craftsmanship, and the entire structure was giving off radiant crimson light, presenting a stunning sight to behold. "What a majestic palace," Shi Chuankong praised in an earnest manner. At this moment, the crimson stone gates at the entrance of the palace were tightly shut, and there were countless crimson runes and designs inscribed upon it, forming what appeared to be an extremely complex formation. Han Li examined the formation closely, and he quickly discovered that it was similar to a star formation in some ways, but also completely different. It seemed to be the product of a star formation combined with some other type of formation. There were 5 small black holes on the formation, arranged evenly to form a unilateral pentagon. These black holes clearly resembled keyholes, and Han Li's eyes lit up slightly as he laid a hand over the 2 crimson keys that he was carrying. Looking at the Crimson Palace, a fervent gleam had appeared in EQI's eyes, and even his breathing had become slightly heavier. "Is this the restricted area where the holy remains can be found?" City Lord Sun Tu asked. "That's right," EQI replied before taking a deep breath to regain his composure. Everyone else immediately erupted into chatter upon hearing this. A contemplative look appeared on Sun Tu's face as he observed the palace, and he suddenly strode over to its gates before pressing a hand against them. Bursts of white starlight began to emanate from the palm of his hand before rippling incessantly, seemingly searching for something. Moments later, Sun Tu withdrew his hand as he declared, "I can indeed sense the aura of a set of remains inside." "What do you mean by that, City Lord Sun? Were you suspecting City Lord of lying to us?" Fu Jian asked in a furious voice. Sun Tu merely took an expressionless glance at Fu Jian and offered no response. EQI raised a hand, gesturing for Fu Jian to stand down as he said, "City Lord Sun has never been here before, so it's understandable for him to proceed with caution. If anyone else also suspects me, then you can all feel free to come forward and take a look. It's all thanks to your protection that our profound city has been able to remain standing to this day. And our Excess Passage City and Profound End City have always had absolute trust in you, City Lord however, that doesn't appear to be the case for everyone." Fu Jian sneered as he took a glance at Sun Tu and Chen Yang, while Qin Yuan hurriedly chimed in agreement. Chen Yang's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he offered no response. "Seeing as no one else wants to come forward, then let's not waste any more time," EQI declared as he took a step forward, and Fu Jian and others eagerly nodded in response. Right at this moment, Sun Tu's voice rang out once again. "Hold on a second. Sun Tu, you need to learn your place. Don't forget that you're just a subsidiary city lord of Profound City," Fu Jian yelled in a furious voice. "Why are you getting so worked up, City Lord Fu? I just wanted to ask City Lord a question," Sun Tu said with a faint smile. EQI wasn't bothered at all, and he prompted with a faint smile, "Go ahead, City Lord Sun. I recall that you mentioned that 5 keys are required to access this restricted area. Right now, the only key that I know of is in fellow Taoist Li's possession, so could it be that you're carrying all 4 of the other keys?" Sun Tu asked. "You think far too highly of me, City Lord Sun. I've only been in these great ruins for a short time, just like everyone else, so how could I have possibly gathered all 4 of the other keys? At the moment, I only have 2, EQI replied with a smile as he flipped a hand over to produce a pair of crimson keys. "So that means we only have 3 keys in total. In that case, how can we open these gates?" Sun Tu asked as his brows furrowed slightly, and Fu Jian and Qin Yuan also turned to EQI to hear his answer. "Rest assured, everyone, all 5 keys have already been assembled. Fellow Taoist Chen, fellow Taoist Li, I believe it's time for you to show everyone your keys," EQI said with a faint smile. Everyone immediately turned to Han Li and Chen Yang with surprised expressions upon hearing this. "I was just about to bring out my keys," Han Li replied with a composed expression, but internally his mind was racing. EQI had led everyone here without any hesitation, seemingly completely unconcerned about the prospect of having insufficient keys, and that had already tipped Han Li off the possibility that he was somehow able to find out who was carrying the other keys and how many they had in their possession. With that in mind, Han Li pulled out 2 keys from the front of his robe, while Chen Yang also revealed the single key in his possession. "So the 2 of you had 3 keys all along. As expected, City Lord always has everything under control," Sun Tu praised with a faint smile. Chen Yang took an apologetic glance at Sun Tu, then cupped his fist in a salute toward EQ as he said, These keys are extremely important, so fellow Taoist Li and I have been holding onto them this entire time for safekeeping purposes. It's fine. The Puppet City cultivators are still yet to make an appearance, so it's better to be safe than sorry, I replied with a dismissive wave. Thank you for your understanding, City Lord E, Chen Yang said with a relieved expression. Seeing as all 5 keys have already been assembled, then hurry up and stop wasting everyone's time. Fu Jian harumphed coldly while glowering at Chen Yang and Han Li with a disdainful expression. Hold on, I have something to say before we open the gates, Han Li suddenly said. Li Feiyu, you're nothing more than a mere gladiator of Green Goat City, so just keep your mouth shut and hand over your keys. There's no place for you to speak here. Fu Jian sneered. It's fine, let's hear what fellow Taoist Li has to say, I said. Thank you, City Lord E. I just wanted to ask how we're going to split the treasures in the restricted area among ourselves, Han Li said with a smile, and everyone immediately fell silent upon hearing this. City Lord E has already said that everyone gets a share of the treasures in the restricted area, and that they'll be split evenly among everyone, Fu Jian said. Han Li turned to Fu Jian with a derisive sneer upon hearing this. Shiao Wang also turned to him with a disdainful expression as he scoffed. Fellow Taoist Fu Jian, you haven't made any contributions on the way here, yet you want to get the same split of treasures as City Lord E. How incredibly optimistic of you. I was only relaying what City Lord E had said earlier. If you think this method of distribution is inappropriate, then you can make your own suggestion, fellow Taoist Shiao, Fu Jian countered with a furious and embarrassed expression. City Lord E was the one who led all of us here, and he also acquired 2 keys, so I think he should get half of the treasures in the restricted area, while we split the rest among ourselves, Shiao Wang declared. So you suggest that we distribute the treasures based on the merit of our contributions. I suppose that's reasonable. City Lord E has indeed made the greatest contribution out of all of us, but fellow Taoist Li has also secured 2 keys, so how much should he get? And what should I be getting for my 1 key? Chen Yang asked. Shiao Wang had no response to this. I don't think there's any method of distribution that can ensure absolute fairness. In my opinion, we should split the treasures inside into 10 parts and distribute them among our 5 cities. Profund City gets 3 parts, Green Goat City gets 2, and the remaining 5 parts will be split evenly among our 3 cities. As for how the treasures are distributed among the cultivators of each city, that'll be up to them to decide, Qin Yuan proposed, and everyone fell into deep thought upon hearing this. I think this is a reasonable proposal, Chen Yang declared after some contemplation. Meanwhile, Shi Chuankong was looking a little concerned. After entering the Sculpture spatial domain, he had stayed in Green Goat City, but was then quickly sent to Profound City, so he didn't know which city he belonged to. Right at this moment, Chen Yang's voice rang out in his mind through voice transmission. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Shi, even though you didn't stay in our Green Goat City for long, I still count you as a citizen of our city. A relieved look appeared on Shi Chuankong's face as he gave a grateful response. Fu Jian and Sun Tu considered this arrangement momentarily before also expressing their approval. Shiao Wang still seemed to be displeased, and he was just about to say something when EQI declared, fellow Taoist Qin's proposal is quite reasonable, so let's adopt it for now. With EQI making his decision known, Shiao Wang naturally couldn't raise any further objections, and everyone began to discuss the method of opening the gates. According to EQI, it was quite simple, and all that had to be done was to push all 5 keys into their corresponding keyholes at once. EQI handed one of his keys to Shiao Wang, while Han Li gave one of his keys to Sun Tu, and before long, EQI, Shiao Wang, Chen Yang, Han Li, and Sun Tu had positioned themselves in front of the gates, with each of them holding one key. "Go!" EQI yelled as he pushed his key into the hole, and everyone else immediately did the same. As soon as the 5 keys were pushed into the keyholes, the stone gates instantly began to tremble, and all of the crimson patterns on their surfaces began to glow radiantly, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. Right at this moment, a string of mechanical clicks rang out from within the palace, and the 5 keys disappeared into the holes. Immediately thereafter, a burst of viscous crimson light erupted out of each of the 5 holes, then twisted themselves together like rope to form a massive crimson rune. In the next instant, the crimson rune vanished into the stone gates, and all of the crimson patterns on the gates faded away. The gates then swung open inward, revealing a wide and dark passageway. "Let's go," EQI said as he led the way inside, and everyone else immediately followed along. After everyone had stepped into the palace, a burst of rumbling rang out from behind them as the stone gates swung shut again. With EQI leading the way, everyone made their way through the passageway before arriving on a plaza. The entire area was shrouded in darkness, but right at this moment, a series of giant orbs began to light up on the ceiling overhead, much like stars on a dark night sky. Han Li looked up and was greeted by the sight of radiant starlight cascading down from above alongside bursts of starpore fluctuations that spread in all directions. Immediately thereafter, a flame lit up on each of the 2 walls on either side in the distance, then spread over the entire length of the walls as lines of fire, illuminating everything within the area. The white stone plaza that everyone was standing on wasn't very large, and there was a line of railing no more than 1,000 feet up ahead. Everyone strode over to the railing to discover that there was a bottomless black abyss on the other side, out of which gusts of cold wind were blowing incessantly. At the center of the railing were 3 stone arch bridges that were each over 100 feet wide and roughly 1,000 feet in length, leading all the way to a giant circular white altar. The altar was over 10,000 feet in radius, and it was also surrounded by white railing, giving it the appearance of a lone, circular mountain standing at the center of the abyss. EQI led everyone down the middle stone arch bridge onto the altar, and as soon as everyone set foot onto the altar, they were stunned by the unimaginably formidable bloodline aura that suddenly swept over them. Only then did Han Li notice that there was a pentagonal crater at the center of the altar, and that was where the incredibly powerful bloodline aura was coming. Standing on each of the 5 corners of the pentagonal crater was a strange-looking black-scaled beast stone statue. They resembled incredibly rotund toads, each with a pair of wings on their backs. Their necks were disproportionately thin and long compared with their bodies, and connected to each neck was a giant lizard-like head that extended out into the air above the crater. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of these stone statues, wary of the possibility that they could be puppets that could spring to life at any moment. Right as everyone was hanging back, unsure of how to proceed, EQI strode over to the edge of the pentagonal crater on his own, and only then did everyone else hurriedly follow along. Han Li peered down into the crater to discover that was an enormous pond of blood, and there was an unfathomable volume of blood inside that was undulating like the tide, while a layer of dense crimson mist was present over its surface. However, regardless of how violently the blood in the pond and the crimson mist above it churned and surged, both remained strictly within the confines of the crater. What was even more surprising to Han Li was that among the churning waves of blood, he could make out pieces of white bones that were as translucent as jade, all of which were giving off tremendous bloodline auras. "Everyone, this altar is the place that we've been searching so arduously for," EQI declared, and everyone turned to him upon hearing this. "Is this where the ultimate treasures of the great ruins reside, City Lord E?" Qin Yuan asked with a perplexed expression. I'm sure all of you have already sensed the tremendous bloodline aura in this place. Is this not already an exceptional treasure for us bodily refinement cultivators? On top of that, the set of remains that I mentioned is also in this pond, EQI replied, and everyone immediately looked down into the pond again upon hearing this. Hanli peered into the pond like everyone else, but even with his eyesight, he was only able to see thick layers of bones beneath the blood, and he was unable to determine whether the holy remains were actually present inside. City Lord E, if the remains are in this pond, then does that mean that we have to go into the pond to retrieve them? Fu Jian asked. That would no different from committing suicide. The bloodline power in this pond is beyond anything you can imagine, and if you try to enter it, you'll only be contributing your own bones to the piles of bones that are already at the bottom of the pond, EQA said. What should we do then? Sun Tu asked. This pond is built upon a blood sacrificial formation, and those 5 statues are the cornerstones of the formation. I'm going to need all of the city lords to help me activate the formation together and draw the set of remains out of the pond, EQA replied. City Lord E, I was hoping you would be able to enlighten me on something, Qin Yuan said with slightly furrowed brows. Go ahead, fellow Taoist Qin, EQA prompted. None of us have entered the great ruins prior to this, so why is it that you seem so familiar with everything in here, City Lord E? Qin Yuan asked. Everyone turned to EQA upon hearing this, and it was clear that Qin Yuan wasn't the only one troubled by this question. While exploring the Sculpture spatial domain on my own some years ago, I came across an ancient plaque that provided details about a certain secret area. It wasn't explicitly stated that this secret area was the Great Ruins, but I always had my suspicions. After entering the Great Ruins, I was able to verify many of the things detailed on the plaque on the way here, and that confirmed my suspicions. As for whether you believe me or not, we've already come so far, so why not place your trust in me one final time? I said as he swept his gaze over everyone. Hanli didn't buy this story at all. It was very likely that he had made up this story on the spot, but it was impossible to rebuke him because no one aside from him knew anything about this place. Having said that, it was indeed true that they had already come this far, and no one was going to be willing to turn back empty-handed. We have full trust in you, City Lord E. At the very least, you have my trust. It's just that no one has ever been here before, so I think we should all carefully examine this area to ensure that there are no hidden traps around before we activate the formation. What do we all say? Sun Tu proposed, and everyone began nodding in agreement. Of course, I was about to suggest the same thing, fellow Taoist son, I said with a smile, and thus, everyone split up to examine the entire altar around the pentagonal pond. Instead of approaching Chen Yang, Hanli teamed up with Shichuankong to examine the outskirts of the altar along the stone railing. Chen Yang took a glance at the two of them, then turned and made his way toward one of the black stone statues, followed closely by Xuanyu and Xing. Meanwhile, the other city lords and their subordinates had each gone to examine one of the remaining 4 stone statues. Sun Tu arrived at the foot of one of the statues, then looked up at its protruding neck for a while before laying a hand onto it and injecting a wisp of starpor inside. The statue remained completely still, displaying no reaction to the injection of starpor. Sun Tu's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he swept a hand over the blood pond, upon which a tendril of crimson mist rose up from below before swirling its way up his sleeve. A faint rustling sound rang out, following which his sleeve reverted back to its original state. Moments later, a reassured look appeared on Sun Tu's face, and he cast his gaze toward Fang Chan. At this moment, Fang Chan was leaning against the stone railing, looking down at the blood pond below with an enraptured look on his face, and drool coming out of his mouth, much like a starving man greeted by the sight of a magnificent feast. "Get back, Channer. You cannot enter that pond, do you hear me?" Sun Tu warned with a serious expression. Fang Chan turned to him with a disappointed expression. "Once the formation is activated, you have to make sure to keep a lookout and protect me. Once we retrieve that set of remains, I'll do my best to secure a part of it for you," Sun Tu assured with a faint smile. An elated look immediately appeared on Fang Chan's face upon hearing this. Meanwhile, Fu Jian was examining another statue, while Duan Tong trailed along behind him with a hesitant expression. "If you have something to say, then say it," Fu Jian said. "For some reason, I have a bad feeling about this place. How about I operate the formation in your stead, City Lord Fu? If something goes wrong, it'll be easier for you to save me than for me to save you," Duan Tong proposed through voice transmission. "EQI specifically asked for all of the city lords to enter the formation, so he must have his own considerations, and I'm sure he wouldn't agree for you to let you take my place. On top of that, your cultivation base is most likely insufficient to activate the formation," Fu Jian replied through voice transmission. Duan Tong fell silent upon hearing this. "There's no need to be overly concerned," Fu Jian said as he patted Duan Tong on the shoulder. "I have some tricks up my sleeve, so even if any mishaps occur, I can look after myself just fine." Duan Tong nodded in response, looking slightly more reassured. Qin Yuan had been keeping an eye on Fu Jian the entire time, and the two of them exchanged a glance and a nod from afar. Each of them had already examined a stone statue and the blood pond without discovering anything amiss, and after carefully examining the ground around the 5 statues, they didn't find anything worthy of concern either. Han Li was gradually making his way toward the center of the altar from its outskirts, pausing momentarily in front of each stone pillar to examine the patterns etched onto its surface. All of a sudden, his brows furrowed slightly, and he turned around to discover Zhu Ziqing standing beside him. "You're Li Fei, you right. My brother tells me that there's more to you than meets the eye, but I can't tell what he's referring to," she remarked. "I'm afraid your brother is mistaken. I am but a mere gladiator of Green Goat City," Han Li replied in an expressionless manner. "In any case, I'm very interested in you. It's very remarkable that a human like you was able to refine your body to this extent. That alone makes you very special in my eyes," Zhu Ziqing said as she stroked her own chin. Zhu Ziyuan's attention had been focused on the blood pond this entire time, and only now did he notice that his sister was no longer by his side. "What are you doing over there? Hurry up and get back here." Zhu Ziqing gave him a sheepish smile before sticking out her tongue in a cheeky manner, then returned to his side before tugging on his sleeve. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. He still recalled that his youngest sister was the sibling that he had been most fond of back in that small village, but having already spent countless years on the path of cultivation, his memory of her had become rather murky. Zhu Ziyuan gave Han Li an apologetic nod, then departed with his sister. Meanwhile, Chen Yang was circling around one of the stone statues, but as he did so, his eyes were constantly darting around from side to side, clearly indicating that there was something on his mind. "City Lord Chen," Xuanyuan Xing called out with a concerned expression, and only then did Chen Yang snap back to his senses, following which he took a glance at Xuanyuan Xing, but didn't say anything. He strode over to the stone railing, and after looking down into the blood pond for a moment, he suddenly reached a hand into his own sleeve before pulling out a yellow spear with lightning patterns etched upon it. With a sweep his hand, the spear shot through a gap in the railing before plunging into the blood pond. A resounding boom rang out as the spear exploded into a ball of white lightning that was around 10 feet in size within the pond. White lightning erupted in all directions, scattering much of the crimson mist, but it was still unable to rise up out of the blood pond. Everyone was given quite a fright by the explosion, and they turned to discover that the blood in the pond was clearly flowing much quicker than before, forming waves that crashed against the 5 walls of the pond. "What the hell are you doing, Chen Yang?" Chen Yuan yelled. "I was just trying to see if there was anything strange inside the pond," Chen Yang explained in a calm manner. I only took a brief glance at the blood pond before returning his gaze to the stone statue in front of him, while Shiao Wang, Zhu Ziyuan, and Zhu Ziqing stood behind him in silence. Some time later, the waves in the blood pond gradually subsided, and nothing out of the ordinary took place. "All right, now that everyone's had a chance to examine everything, should we discuss how we're going to activate the formation and retrieve the remains? It hasn't been easy coming this far, and I hope you're not all just here for sightseeing purposes," I said, and even though his expression remained placid, there was clearly a hint of impatience in his voice. The other city lords hadn't detected anything amiss, so they had no excuses to delay any longer. Hence, after exchanging a few glances with one another, all of them gathered around EQI. At this point, Han Li and Shi Chuankong had already made their way around to the other side of the altar, where they spotted 3 more white stone arch bridges in the distance, leading deeper into this space from the altar. There were no flames to illuminate the darkness beyond those bridges, so it was impossible to see what was there. After hearing EQI's call, the 2 of them immediately stopped in their tracks, then hesitated momentarily before returning to the main group. Up to this point, I've been able to verify much of the content inscribed on the stone plaque that I mentioned, so its contents appear to be reliable. Hence, why don't we use the method on the plaque to try and activate the altar? EQI suggested once everyone had gathered around. "In that case, please tell us how to proceed, City Lord Chen Yuan said. "This blood sacrificial formation has a total of 5 cores that need to be activated by 5 people in unison. I would like the other city lords to enter the formation with me, as your cultivation bases and physical constitutions will hold you in good stead against the tremendous pressure that'll be exerted on us from the operation of the formation. Everyone else will be responsible for lookout duty. That way, all cities will have contributed to the cause, thereby making everyone worthy of their share of the spoils," I said. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this, and there was an atmosphere of skepticism in the air. I didn't try to hurry anyone into making a decision, merely observing the 4 city lords in silence. "City Lord can you tell us what dangers we could face while the formation is in operation? That way, we'll be able to at least somewhat prepare ourselves for any unforeseen mishaps," Sun Tu said. "On the path of cultivation, risk and reward always come hand in hand. The more risk you incur, the greater the reward you could potentially receive, so how much you make out of this opportunity is up to each of you," I replied with a faint smile. "What does that mean, City Lord Fu Jian asked with slightly furrowed brows, and everyone else was also rather perplexed by this answer. "My guess is that while the formation is in operation, a vast amount of bloodline power will escape from the blood pond in the form of blood mist to enter the bodies of the 5 people situated at the cores of the formation. The influx of bloodline power could either significantly enhance our bodies or overwhelm us and result in self-detonation, hence the risk and the reward," I explained. "So that means that all 5 of us will be able to absorb the bloodline power in this pond to bolster our own physical constitutions?" Fu Jian hurriedly asked, with an excited look on his face. Everyone else was also ecstatic to hear this, with the exceptions of Chen Yang, Han Li, and Sun Tu, who were still looking very concerned and skeptical of EQI's claims. Han Li's intuition told him that there was more to this formation than met the eye, and that EQI was downplaying the risk involved in operating the formation, so he had no choice in getting involved in this at all. In any case, the thing that he was truly interested in wasn't here. Instead, there was a very good chance that it was somewhere in the darkness on the other side of those 3 stone arch bridges. That's right, fellow Taoist Fu. However, the process is going to be excruciatingly painful, and we must all persevere until the holy remains are drawn out of the pond by the power of the formation, EQI said. While this is indeed an alluring prospect, the fact of the matter is that our bodies can only hold so much bloodline power. There's clearly far too much bloodline power in this pond for us to withstand. What if all of us are overwhelmed before the holy remains are revealed? Won't we all suffer the terrible fate of self-detonation then? Sun Tu asked. Chen Yuan and the others immediately turned their attention back to EQI upon hearing this question. Rest assured, everyone, the 5 cores of the formation are all interconnected. As soon as one of us is on the verge of being overwhelmed by the influx of bloodline power, the excessive bloodline power will be evenly distributed to everyone else, thereby ensuring that the formation remains in balance. So if one of us self-detonates, then all of us will self-detonate, and no one is incurring more risk than anyone else, EQA explained. Even so, all of us are still taking on a significant amount of risk, Sun Tu mused with a hesitant expression. Of course you can't just expect good things to fall onto your lap without taking any risks, City Lord Sun. If you really don't want to go through with this, then I'll gladly take your place, Shiao Wang said with a smile. Aside from the city lords, he was the only one present worthy of entering the formation. There's no need for that, Elder Shiao, Sun Tu replied with a smile. I do have some qualms, but I'm still willing to do my part and enter the formation with the other city lords. Rest assured, everyone, if the bloodline power becomes too much for us to bear, then I'll lead everyone out of the formation in unison. Just follow my instructions and everyone will be safe. Does anyone else have any other questions? EQI asked with a smile. No one else raised any further questions, so EQI declared. In that case, please familiarize yourselves with the activation method for the formation, and will enter the formation once you're all ready. He then openly articulated the formation activation method to everyone, without making any effort to hide it. Shortly thereafter, he swept a sleeve through the air as he ordered, "Enter the formation." All of the city lords instantly sprang up into the air in unison, before landing atop the head of the 5 statues. As for Han Li and the others, they were instructed by EQI to open some distance between themselves and the blood pond to observe from afar. The 5 city lords sat down with their knees crossed, then began to chant an incantation while making a series of hand seals. Initially, the blood sacrificial formation displayed no reaction, but over time, crimson mist swirling inside began to gather in the 5 corners of the formation, revealing large sections of the blood pond underneath, which had begun bubbling incessantly. At the same time, the 5 statues also began to display some changes. Han Li had always been rather apprehensive of the statues, so he was the first one out of everyone to notice these changes. His brows furrowed slightly as he noticed that a layer of fine patterns had appeared over the surface of the statue beneath Chen Yang, and one could easily mistake those patterns as a layer of scales if they didn't look closely. However, as those patterns began to glow red, everyone discovered that it was actually a layer of tiny runes that were similar to star runes. Once all of the runes on the 5 statues had lit up, the eyes of the statues abruptly sprang open, revealing a bright red gleam. Immediately thereafter, a burst of rumbling erupted from underground, causing the entire altar to shudder violently. The blood within the pond was instantly stirred up into a frenzy, bubbling and churning incessantly, while the crimson mist that had gathered at the 5 corners of the pond began to swirl upward in the form of corkscrew-shaped pillars. The 5 statues opened their mouths up wide to accept the swirling pillars of crimson mist, and at the same time, A pentagram formation appeared on the top of each of their heads in unison. A pillar of crimson light then erupted out of each of the formations, encompassing the 5 city lords within them. Crimson mist began to surge out of the pillar of crimson light before entering their bodies through all of their orifices, instantly causing their skin to turn bright red. Meanwhile, the runes on the 5 statues were only glowing brighter and brighter, and bursts of crimson light erupted out of their wings before spreading outward and connecting together to form a light barrier that encompassed the entire blood pond. An alarmed look appeared on Duan Tong's face upon seeing this, but Shiao Wang reassured, "Not to worry, this is just a barrier conjured up by the formation. Once the formation ceases operation, the barrier will vanish on its own." Meanwhile, Fang Chan was standing behind the statue that Sun Tu was situated on, peering into the light barrier with a rare look of focus on his face. As more and more crimson mist surged out of the statues, the eyes of the 5 city lords had already turned bright red. On top of that, clumps of crimson crystals had appeared around their eyes, making it appear as if they had grown clusters of scales. As the bloodline power surged relentlessly into their bodies, mixed emotions of anxiety, excitement, tension, and anticipation had appeared on all of their faces. After some careful examination, Chen Yang was able to determine that there was no restrictive power in the light barrier that encompassed the entire blood pond, and that made him feel slightly more reassured. He exchanged a glance and a nod with Sun Tu from afar, and the latter had clearly detected this as well. If anything were to go wrong, the two of them should be able to leave the formation at any moment. Fu Jian and Qin Yuan quickly made the same discovery as well, and in the wake of this reassuring discovery, they were able to focus wholeheartedly on operating the formation. All of a sudden, Qin Yuan suddenly let loose a long roar, and his cheeks had taken on a bright red complexion, while an excited gleam had appeared in his eyes, in stark contrast with his usual sickly appearance. His robes were flapping audibly despite the absence of wind, and a vast number of specks of white light had appeared over his body, over 200 of which were quite substantial in appearance, while the majority were more illusory and insubstantial. Immediately thereafter, a similar sight presented itself on the bodies of Chen Yang, Fu Jian, and Sun Tu as well. As for EQI, specks of substantial and insubstantial light had appeared over his body as well, but there were over 800 of the former variety. Brother Li, those specks of light appear to correspond with the profound acupoints on their bodies. Could it be that these are all the profound acupoints that they've opened? Shi Chuankang speculated through voice transmission. There are far too many of them for all of them to be profound acupoints. If I had to guess, those more substantial specks of light should be the profound acupoints that they've already opened, while the rest are the ones that they're still yet to open. Having said that, Han Li's voice trailed off here as a thoughtful look appeared on his face. "What is it?" Shi Chuankang asked. "Do you still recall how back when we first met Chen Yang, he mentioned that EQI had already opened over 1,000 profound acupoints? Why is it that we can only see fewer than 900 right now?" Han Li asked. "Could it be that he intentionally lied to us or was just trying to scare us?" Shi Chuankang speculated. "I'm not sure. I guess we'll just have to ask Chen Yang about it later," Han Li replied. Right as the two of them were conversing with each other, the crimson light radiating from the 5 pentagram formations on the stone statues suddenly brightened significantly, and the faces of the 5 city lords instantly became contorted with agony, as if they were in excruciating pain. Everyone hurriedly turned their attention to the city lords upon seeing this, and they discovered that crimson light had begun to gather in some of the profound acupoints on their bodies that were still yet to be opened, and they were gradually taking on a more and more substantial form. At the same time, their auras were also rapidly elevating, and it seemed that they really were benefiting immensely from the influx of bloodline power. Envious looks appeared in everyone's eyes upon seeing this. Meanwhile, the blood inside the pentagonal pond was churning even more violently, as if it had been brought to a boil, raising up large plumes of crimson mist that were absorbed by the 5 statues. As the blood in the pond was depleted, the bones submerged within it were gradually revealed, and it really did seem like it was only a matter of time before the set of remains at the bottom of the pond rose to the surface. Han Li had been carefully observing the formation this entire time, but he hadn't noticed anything amiss, and he couldn't help but wonder if his concerns were perhaps unwarranted. "I'm going to take a look down the back, brother Shi. You stay here and keep an eye on everything else. If anything happens here, do your best to remain uninvolved until I get back," Han Li said through voice transmission. Shi Chuankong faltered slightly upon hearing this, then asked, "If you feel like something's going to happen here, then why don't you let me come with you? We don't know what's waiting for us further down this hall, so there's no need for you to come and take the risk with me, and I really do need you to stay here and keep an eye on things. On top of that, we don't want to make it seem like we're very close with each other, as that could arouse suspicions from the others," Han Li explained. Shi Chuankong wasn't entirely convinced by this, but he still nodded in agreement in the end. With that, Han Li made his way around the light barrier that encompassed the blood pond, before making his way toward the 3 stone arch bridges on the other side of the altar. However, he had only taken a few steps when Shiao Wang suddenly appeared in his path. "Where are you going, fellow Taoist Li?" Shi Chuankong was just about to step forward to back Han Li up, but Han Li urged him to stand down through voice transmission. "All of the city lords are busy operating the formation, and I can't help them in any way, so I thought I'd do some exploring on my own. Is there a problem?" Han Li asked. "Right now, we're at a crucial juncture of the formation's operation, and it's of the utmost importance that nothing goes wrong. Hence, I think it would be best for you to stay here and keep a lookout for your city lord," Shiao Wang said in a cold voice. "Our city lord already has fellow Taoist Xuanyuan and fellow Taoist Shi looking out for him, so I'm sure he'll be fine," Han Li countered. "Even so, I can't allow you to walk around as you please. What if you inadvertently set off some type of trap that impacts the operation of the formation?" Shiao Wang objected in an unrelenting manner. "Get out of my way, Shiao Wang. Some of the other people here may be afraid of you, but that doesn't apply to me. If it's a fight that you want, then I'll gladly oblige," Han Li sneered. Shiao Wang was naturally not afraid to face Han Li in battle, but if a battle were to ensue between the two, Xuanyuan Xing and Shi Chuankong would undoubtedly also get involved, as would Zhu Ziyuan and Zhu Ziking. There was no telling what the cultivators of the other 3 cities would do, and if they were to be swept up in the battle too, then the situation would truly descend into complete chaos. While he was confident in his own ability to kill all of the cultivators from the other cities with the help of Zhu Ziyuan, there was no guarantee that such a battle wouldn't affect the operation of the blood formation, and the consequences of that would be far too much for him to bear. "You better not cause any trouble, otherwise." Han Li sped past Shiao Wang in a flash before the latter had a chance to articulate his threat, and in that instant, Han Li displayed such incredible speed that even Shiao Wang had failed to react. He hurriedly darted back in retreat to open up some distance between himself and Han Li, and an apprehensive look had appeared in his eyes. Han Li paid no heed to Shiao Wang as he made his way toward the 3 stone arch bridges. Everyone's attention was focused on the 5 city lords within the blood formation, so the minor altercation that had just taken place between Han Li and Shiao Wang hadn't attracted much attention. Zhu Ziking was standing beside her brother, watching Han Li's departing figure with a curious look in her eyes, while Mistress Liu Hua was also looking at Han Li with a perplexed look in his eyes. However, he still had to stay here to observe the changes in the blood formation, so he naturally couldn't follow Han Li. Li. The three stone arch bridges in the back were completely identical in style, material, and construction to the ones in the front. Once again, Han Li made his way over the middle bridge, and he quickly reached the other side. On the other side of the stone bridge was another flat plaza that wasn't particularly large, and there were two giant stone gates up ahead. There were no flames on the walls here, so the entire area was very dark, but Han Li was able to make out a carving of a beastly head engraved onto the stone gates thanks to his exceptional eyesight. It was a lion-like head that was covered in scales, and it also had a single sharp horn. There was a line that ran down the center of the head, splitting it down the middle lengthwise, with one half of the head on each gate. Han Li's brows were slightly furrowed in contemplation, as he recalled back to the contents of the jade slip that Taoist Zai had given to him. Some time later, he murmured to himself, "There's a scaled who beast guardian engraved onto these gates, so this should be the place." With that, Han Li strode over to the gates, but attempting instead of pushing them open, he laid his palms flat against two of the beastly carvings protruding fangs before pressing on each of them a few times. A faint click rang out as rest of the fangs in the carving's mouth slid away in unison to reveal a pitch-black opening. Han Li inspected his surroundings briefly, then made his way inside. Immediately thereafter, another faint crack rang out as the fangs of the beastly carving slid back into place to block the opening again. Upon entering through the opening, Han Li found himself in an area that was completely shrouded in darkness, and even with his eyesight, he was unable to see anything. All of a sudden, the faint yet audible sound of a water droplet splashing onto the ground rang out from directly up ahead. Han Li channeled his Titan Vajra arts, and the profound acupoints on his arms began to radiate white light that illuminated the surrounding area. Only then did it become clear to him that he was currently standing at the top of a stone staircase. The light radiating from his profound acupoints was rather limited, so he was only able to see about 5 to 6 steps ahead. After a brief hesitation, he began to make his way down the staircase step by step. After descending close to 20 steps, the ground up ahead suddenly flattened out. It seemed that he had arrived on a level platform, and the sound of the falling water droplets had become even more pronounced here. Han Li walked a few steps toward his perceived source of the sound, arriving before a stone pillar that was around 3 feet tall, with a stone basin that was around a foot in diameter at the top. The basin was filled with some type of black liquid that was giving off a faint, rank odor, and it seemed to be some type of beast fat. Another faint splash rang out as a drop of liquid fell into the basin, sending faint ripples proliferating over the surface of the liquid that was already inside. Han Li rubbed his fingers together, and a burst of starpor erupted out of his fingertips as a speck of white light, which fell into the stone basin. A flame was instantly ignited within the basin, immediately following which 2 lines of fire surged out of the basin, spreading along the indentations that branched out from either side of the stone pillar. Han Li's gaze followed the movement of the line of fire, all the way until it had spread along the ground for over 1,000 feet, at which it seemed to have reached its conclusion. All of a sudden, the ground on either side erupted into flames, illuminating the entire space that Han Li was in. Han Li inspected his surroundings momentarily, and a stunned look appeared on his face. The space that he was in was around 2,000 to 3,000 feet in size, and there was a series of massive reliefs engraved onto the walls, depicting tall mountains, turbulent rivers, majestic cities, and various other pieces of stunning scenery. The forests engraved onto the walls were teeming with exotic beasts, while cultivators were flying through the air, and it seemed to be depicting a scene that would only be found outside of the Sculpture spatial domain. Why are there reliefs like these in a place like this? Could they have been made by someone in reminiscence of the outside world? Hanli strode over to the walls to carefully examine all of the reliefs engraved upon them, and he discovered that the reliefs weren't connected, and there didn't seem to be any clear correlation between them, either. Before long, Hanli had made his way deep into this space, where he spotted a black stone coffin that was around 30 feet in size on the ground. Engraved onto the coffin was what appeared to be a male puppet with a string attached to each of its joints, suspending it in midair. Its expression and limbs were all very stiff, presenting a rather peculiar sight to behold. All of the strings ran over the surface of the stone coffin before converging above the puppet's head, and upon closer inspection, Hanli discovered that all of the strings had come together to form a yin-yang symbol above the puppet's head, but there was no customary 8 trigrams design around the yin-yang symbol. After a brief hesitation, Hanli gently laid a hand upon the yin-yang symbol, and he discovered that there was some give to it, so it could be pressed down by external force. An elated look appeared in Hanli's eyes upon seeing this, and he began to chant an incantation as he pressed down upon the yin-yang symbol. The yin-yang symbol slowly sank down under the gentle pressure exerted by Hanli's hand, and the sound of stone grating on stone rang out as the stone coffin slid downward to reveal a transparent, cubic crystal container, with each side roughly measuring 5 inches in length. Inside the crystal container was a hollow silver ball that was riddled with extremely complex patterns, and it was also giving off peculiar energy fluctuations that were similar to soul power fluctuations. "Looks like this is it." He observed the silver ball momentarily, then carefully examined the area around the crystal container, yet right as he was about to reach out to grab it, it occurred to him that something wasn't quite right. He raised his head to continue inspecting the scenic reliefs on the surrounding walls, following which he made his way back to the stone coffin before replacing its lid. He then began to pace back and forth while thinking back to the contents of the jade slip, and a particular detail suddenly sprang into his mind. A look of realization then appeared on his face as his gaze roamed over the surrounding reliefs once again. He made his way around the stone coffin until he was directly behind it, then began to stroke his hand along the relief on the wall before pressing down onto the sun engraved upon it. A faint click rang out as the sun sank into the wall under the pressure exerted by his hand. Hanli's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, and he made his way over to the next relief on his right. This relief depicted an image of an impending storm, and Hanli pressed down onto a particular cloud on the wall. After that, he pressed down onto a river and a mountain on the next 2 reliefs. The detail that he had recalled from the jade slip was that the 8 trigrams were supposed to be concealed within these reliefs, and that was why they were absent from around the yin-yang symbol. As all of the hidden mechanisms that represented the 8 trigrams were pressed down by Hanli, the entire space began to tremble violently, and the stone coffin on the ground sank down in a shaky manner to reveal an entrance to a passageway. A faint smile appeared on Hanli's face upon seeing this. The entrance of the passageway wasn't very large, only able to fit 1 person at a time, and it revealed a stone staircase that led underground. Hanli made his way down the staircase, and after descending around a dozen steps, the staircase turned left, leading to an opening that had white light glowing inside. Hanli carefully made his way through the opening, arriving in another space that was only less than 200 feet in size and was almost completely empty. However, even though the area wasn't very large, there were dense clusters of star bones embedded into the walls, and the light that they were giving off was what was illuminating this space. Hanli cast his gaze forward to discover a rectangular, black stone table positioned against the wall directly across from him, upon which were placed two extremely intricate white jade boxes. After briefly examining the surrounding area to ensure that nothing was amiss, he strode over to the table and removed the lid of one of the jade boxes. A fist-sized ball was revealed, sitting peacefully inside the box. The ball was black in color, and just like the silver ball that Han Li had seen in the stone coffin, it was also hollow and riddled with strange patterns. However, this ball wasn't giving off any energy fluctuations, and it didn't appear to be remarkable in any way aside from its intricate appearance. Hence, in contrast, the silver ball from before seemed more like a genuine artifact. Han Li lifted the ball out of the box, then began to carefully inspect it while cradling it over the palms of his hands, and he spotted arcs of golden lightning that were as thin as strands of hair, silently flashing deep within the heart of the ball. Han Li had a feeling that this was no ordinary item, so he carefully tucked it down the front of his own robe. After that, he turned his gaze to the other jade box. This box had a round disc that was riddled with complex patterns embedded onto its surface, and there were two circles of holes on its outer edge, with a tiny golden rune visible beneath each hole. Han Li reached out to lift the jade box, only to discover that it seemed to be fused as one with the table, refusing to budge even a single inch. A series of profound acupoints lit up over his arms as he redoubled his efforts, and the jade box shuddered violently along with the table beneath it, but both the box and the table remained firmly locked into place. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and he suddenly raised a fist before throwing a punch at the jade box. A burst of radiant starlight immediately flashed over the surface of the jade box, releasing a burst of tremendous power that forced Han Li to stumble back a step. A perplexed look appeared on his face as he turned his gaze back to the jade box. The jade slip that Taoist Zai had given him had explicitly mentioned that the black ball was something that had to be secure, but there was no mention of what was in the other jade box. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as a series of profound acupoints lit up over his body, and he mustered up even more power before throwing another punch at the jade box. The retaliative force released by the jade box was even stronger this time, forcing Han Li back several steps, all the way until his back was against the wall. Han Li harumphed coldly as he prepared to launch an even more powerful attack at the jade box, Butrite at this moment. He noticed that a crack was slowly appearing on the ground beneath his feet, leading straight to the underside of the jade box on the stone table. He immediately realized that he couldn't continue to try and break open the jade box through brute force. Otherwise, this entire space was going to be destroyed along with it. On top of that, he didn't have any more time to waste here. Right as Han Li was able to return to the main group, he suddenly spotted an image of a starry sky on the ground, illuminated by the light radiating from the star bones on the surrounding walls. However, the image was quite small, and there were also parts that were missing. Han Li observed the image for a long while before a look of surprise and realization suddenly appeared on his face, and he clapped his hands together as he exclaimed, "I see now." Immediately thereafter, he pulled his star wave pen out of his sleeve and began repairing the image. After completing his final stroke, Han Li stood up straight again to examine his own handiwork. The starry sky image on the ground had begun radiating dazzling light, and a string of faint mechanical clicks rang out as the disc on the jade box began to slowly turn, following which the box sprang open on its own. An elated look appeared on Han Li's face, and he peered into the jade box to discover a sheet of light gray beast hide that had been folded into a small square. Han Li picked up the sheet of beast hide before spreading it open to reveal an image of an underground pentagonal altar, with a strange winged beast statue perched on each corner of the altar. It was identical in appearance to the blood sacrificial altar that the 5 city lords were currently in. Above the image of the altar was a heading that read, Weeping Blood Formation, and Han Li immediately began carefully examining the entire image. After comparing the Weeping Blood Formation to the one outside, Han Li was quickly able to determine that the two were indeed one and the same. On top of that, according to the image, the blood pond in the formation was enormous, and the formation patterns engraved onto its walls were complex beyond belief. There were also small passages of annotations around the image of the formation, pointing out certain important features of the formation and their functions. The more Han Li saw, the more he came to understand what EQI's true intentions were. In the end, his gaze settled on an annotation on the bottom right corner of the image, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. At this moment, the 5 city lords were still operating the formation outside, and at this point, all 5 of them had opened a large number of profound acupoints. Chen Yang already had over 290 profound acupoints glowing over his body, which meant that he had opened close to 30 profound acupoints in this short span of time. Sun Tu and the others were in a similar situation, and all of them were naturally ecstatic to see this. All of the bystanders were looking on with envious expressions, but they knew that they were far below the 5 city lords in terms of both power and status, so they didn't dare to raise any complaints. At this point, the formation was operating far faster than before, and the pentagram formations beneath the 5 city lords had expanded to several times their original size, releasing far thicker pillars of crimson light. The surrounding crimson light barrier had also become far thicker than before, and the countless runes on its surface were giving off a faint buzzing sound. The stone statues beneath the 5 city lords were also displaying significant changes. They had turned from their original black color into a shade of dark red, and rays of crimson light were shooting out of their bodies, presenting a peculiar sight to behold. The 4 subsidiary city lords were all observing these changes with uncertain looks in their eyes, and Sun Tu and Chen Yang exchanged a glance with each other, only to see their own unease mirrored in one another's eyes. Thankfully, there was still no restrictive power emanating from the crimson light barrier, and that instilled them with a great deal of reassurance. At this point, the blood level in the pond had dropped significantly, revealing sets of even more massive remains, and it seemed that the bottom was about to be revealed. All of a sudden, the blood in the pond began to churn violently, forming a vortex that was several dozen feet in size. Immediately thereafter, a large ball of crimson light appeared deep within the vortex, giving off formidable energy fluctuations. These energy fluctuations were a combination of starpor and bloodline power, much like the power harbored within sulfurous flame blood clouds. Furthermore, these energy fluctuations were so tremendous that even the 4 subsidiary city lords couldn't help but be astonished. "Is that the holy remains?" Sun Tu asked with an elated expression. The other profound city cultivators were unable to see the ball of crimson light within the crater, but they could all sense the formidable energy fluctuations surging through the air as well. "Fellow Taoists, the holy remains have already been revealed. Let's make one final effort." EQI rallied with an ecstatic look on his face, and the 5 city lords immediately redoubled their efforts, chanting their incantation and making hand seals with far more urgency than before. As a result, the blood in the pond began to churn even more violently, and it began rising up into the air before gushing into the 5 statues as 5 pillars of blood. The blood level in the pond was rapidly lowering, and in just mere moments, all of the blood in the pond had vanished into the 5 statues. The scale-like patterns on the surfaces of the 5 statues began flashing erratically, following which the statues turned from dark red to a shade of bright red. At the same time, the true form of the ball of crimson light was also revealed, and it was a door of crimson light, within which was what appeared to be another world. The powerful energy fluctuations were coming from inside the door of light, and there were holy remains to be seen at all. Furthermore, with no more blood in the way, the energy fluctuation emanating from the door of light had become even more formidable. "What's the meaning of this, City Lord E? Where are the holy remains?" Sun Tu asked with a dark expression, and the other three city lords turned to EQI as well. However, EQI paid no heed to the four of them, as he remained seated atop his stone statue with his eyes closed, continuing to make hand seals while chanting an incantation on his own. All of a sudden, a burst of radiant crimson light erupted out of the statue beneath him, illuminating his entire body crimson. Immediately thereafter, 7 or 8 thick tendrils of crimson light shot out of the statue, then fused into EQI's body after flailing around momentarily. EQI's body trembled violently for a moment before falling still again, and he opened his eyes to reveal that they had turned bright red. Not only that, but his body had swelled up significantly like a balloon, and a series of red patterns had appeared over his skin, giving him the appearance of a hellish demon. The four city lords' expressions changed drastically upon seeing this, and in particular, Chen Yuan had immediately sprung to his feet, but before he had a chance to get away, a burst of crimson light suddenly erupted out of his lower abdomen. The burst of crimson light then swelled to form a crimson cloud that encompassed half of Chen Yuan's body. Countless runes could be seen within the crimson cloud, resonating with the statue beneath him, and he seemed to have been completely immobilized. Almost at the exact same moment, bursts of crimson light also erupted out of the bodies of the other three city lords, forming crimson clouds that immobilized them as well. All of the other profound city cultivators immediately stepped forward with alarmed looks on their faces upon seeing this, but all of a sudden, Shiao Wang, Zhu Ziyuan, and Zhu Ziqing appeared in their path. "The 5 city lords are currently operating the formation, so it would be best for all of you to stay back," Shiao Wang said as a tremendous aura erupted out of his body, striking everyone with a sense of asphyxiation. Stunned looks appeared on their faces as they reflexively stopped in their tracks. Out of everyone present, Mistress Liu Hua was the only one who remained calm and composed, seemingly completely unsurprised by this turn of events. Inside the formation, EQI cast his gaze toward the other 4 city lords, and at this moment, all of the warmth that had previously been in his eyes was completely absent. The hearts of the other city lords immediately sank upon seeing this. Clinging onto one final shred of hope, Fu Jian forced a smile onto his own face as he asked, "What are you doing, City Lord E? The holy remains still haven't emerged, so I can't allow the 4 of you to leave. It was apparent to me that the 4 of you were getting cold feet, so I had no choice but to employ some measures to make you stay," EQI replied with a faint smile. "Drop the act, EQI. You clearly planned all of this from the very beginning," Sun Tu harumphed coldly. "How did you manage to do this? We've all been so careful up to this point." "It was the sulfurous flame blood clouds," Chen Yang exclaimed as a look of realization appeared in his eyes, and the eyes of the other 3 city lords instantly changed slightly upon hearing this. "Well done, fellow Taoist Chen. You're as sharp as ever. I knew that none of you would be able to resist the sulfurous flame blood clouds that I planted," EQI confirmed with a smile. "City Lord Sun, City Lord Fu, didn't you two say that you didn't find any sulfurous flame blood clouds?" Qin Yuan asked as he turned to Sun Tu and Fu Jian, and their expressions instantly stiffened slightly upon hearing this. It was clear that they had been lying, and that they had also obtained sulfurous flame blood clouds, but had chosen to keep that a secret for some reason. "So that's why there were so many sulfurous flame blood clouds in that area. You've been plotting against us from the very beginning. What are your intentions?" Chen Yang asked. You'll all find out soon enough, EQI chuckled as he made a string of hand seals, and countless crimson patterns abruptly appeared in the surrounding formation, instantly making the formation several times more complex than before. Countless patterns appeared on the crimson light barrier as well, giving it a far more substantial form. At the same time, radiant crimson light also erupted out of the statues beneath the four city lords before surging into their bodies. The four city lords struggled with all their might, but they were completely immobilized by the crimson clouds around them, and they could only look on helplessly as the crimson light invaded their bodies. A series of squiggly crimson patterns appeared over their skin, and these patterns were writhing and moving as if they were living creatures. All four of them began to tremble as agonized looks appeared on their faces, much to the alarm of all of their subordinates. "City Lord's son," Fang Chan yelled in an urgent voice as he sprang forward through the air, followed closely by Duan Tong, Xuanyuan Xing, and Lu Gang. In contrast, Shi Chuankong backed away from the scene, following Han Li's instructions to remain a detached observer. A cold sneer appeared on Shiao Wang's face as he swept a hand through the air, unleashing 5 bursts of sharp power that resembled 5 divine swords slicing through space, leaving 5 deep trenches in the ground in their wake. Meanwhile, Han Li was on his way back to joining the main group when his entire body abruptly stiffened, and he fell to the ground without any warning. A burst of crimson light had erupted out of his lower abdomen, forming a crimson cloud that encompassed his entire body. After sweeping his spiritual sense through his own body, Han Li immediately identified the source of this crimson cloud. "Those sulfurous flame blood clouds have been tampered with." At this moment, a pair of glowing, crimson clouds had appeared within his abdomen, releasing countless tiny crimson runes that were giving off formidable restrictive forces, rendering him completely immobile. Even though Han Li had suddenly been immobilized, he remained calm and collected as he channeled his heavenly, baleful purgatory arts with all his might to fight against the restrictions in his body. However, the restrictions were situated deep within his dantian, and they were completely resistant to his efforts to counteract them. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as several translucent chains flew out of his glabella before vanishing into his own dantian. The restrictions in his dantian had immobilized his body, but they had no effect on his spiritual sense. After burrowing into his dantian, the spiritual sense chains wrapped themselves around the 2 crimson cloud restrictions before tearing at them with all their might, and the restrictions immediately began to tremble slightly. Han Li was quite relieved to see that his spiritual sense chains were effective on these restrictions, and he took a deep breath as he redoubled his efforts, and a series of translucent threads shot out of his glabella before intertwining together to form a small, translucent sword. The sword was only around an inch in length, but the spiritual sense fluctuations that it was giving off were far more formidable than those of the spiritual sense chains, and it was none other than Han Li's spiritual sense sword. The spiritual sense sword vanished into his dantian in a flash, then swelled to around twice its original size, giving off such formidable sword intent that the surfaces of the 2 crimson cloud restrictions immediately began rippling incessantly. The spiritual sense sword then flew straight into one of the crimson clouds, and the latter was instantly sliced into 2 before exploding into countless specks of crimson light without being able to put up any resistance. The residual specks of crimson light were then quickly cleared away by the bloodline power in Han Li's body. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and the spiritual sense sword swung around at his behest to strike the other crimson cloud, quickly eradicating it as well. With the 2 crimson clouds gone, Han Li instantly regained his mobility, and a contemplative look appeared on his face as he returned to his feet. It was clear that these restrictions had come from the 2 sulfurous flame blood clouds that he had devoured, And with that in mind, a thought suddenly occurred to Han Li, following which he immediately continued to hurry back to the main group. Meanwhile, the subordinates of the 4 subsidiary city lords were still locked in a fierce battle against Shiao Wang and the Zhu siblings. Even though Fang Chan and the others had a numbers advantage, they were clearly on HTE back foot, and it didn't take long before they began suffering injuries. Shi Chuankong was looking on with an urgent expression, but he continued to refrain from entering the fray. Inside the formation, more and more crimson lines were appearing over the bodies of the 4 subsidiary city lords, and Fu Jian was howling in agony as he pleaded, "Please spare me, City Lord E. I've always been your most loyal servant. I know you're loyal, and that's why I gave you this opportunity. You should be honored to sacrifice yourself for the greater good of Profound City," EQI replied with a faint smile, and there wasn't even a hint of sympathy in his eyes. The crimson light pouring out of the 4 statues continued to surge into the bodies of the 4 subsidiary city lords, and it wasn't going to take long before the crimson lines spread over the entirety of their bodies. "Fine. If this is how you're going to treat us, then there's no need for me to hold back any longer." Fu Jian roared in a furious voice before opening his mouth to release a streak of white light, which contained a talisman that bore an image of a small dagger with a serrated edge. A translucent dagger projection shot out of the talisman, then pierced into his lower abdomen in a flash. A faint thump rang out, and much of the crimson cloud around Fu Jian's upper body instantly dissipated, allowing him to free his arms. However, the crimson cloud around his lower body remained as dense as ever, rooting him to the stone statue down below. "So you had a soul dagger talisman up your sleeve this entire time," EQI mused, but he didn't seem to be particularly concerned. After freeing his own arms, Fu Jian immediately swept both hands through the air, and 4 thin streaks of black light shot out of his sleeves, with 2 of them hurtling directly toward EQI, while the other 2 were aimed at the statue down below. At the same time, he opened his mouth once again to release 3 more streaks of white light, which pierced into the bodies of Sun Tu and the others in a flash. Immediately thereafter, much of the crimson clouds around them dissipated, and their upper bodies were freed as well. "Thank you, City Lord Fu. Don't hold back any more, fellow Taoists. We're all going to have to work together if we want to survive." Chen Yang yelled as he swept both sleeves through the air, and out of his left sleeve flew 3 short yellow spears, all of which immediately sped toward EQI like lightning. At the same time, a bone saber appeared in his right hand, and he slashed it down upon the statue beneath him with all his might. Sun Tu and Qin Yuan also retaliated as soon as they were freed, sending a black sword projection and a streak of resplendent crimson light hurtling toward EQI. Simultaneously, they were also attacking the statues beneath themselves. All of this had taken place in the blink of an eye, but EQI remained completely unconcerned. A mocking sneer appeared on his face as he switched to a different hand seal, and a crimson light barrier instantly emerged over each of the statues beneath the 4 subsidiary city lords. The statue beneath EQI also began to release radiant crimson light that formed a protective light barrier. A string of resounding explosions rang out, as lights of different colors flashed within the formation, while the nearby ground also trembled violently. Fang Chan, Shiao Wang, and the others hurriedly stopped what they were doing upon hearing the commotion, then backed away from one another before looking into the formation. All of the lights in the formation quickly faded away, and it was revealed that EQI and the 5 stone statues remained completely unscathed. The crimson light barriers around the statues appeared to be rather thin, but they were extremely resilient. Stunned looks appeared on the faces of the 4 subsidiary city lords upon seeing this, while EQI sneered, "The Weeping Blood formation is not something the likes of you can even hope to destroy. You should save your energy. Maybe you'll be able to survive a little longer then. Immediately thereafter, the stone statues beneath the 4 subsidiary city lords up lit upon again, and countless threads of crimson light shot forth before ensnaring them. Numerous tadpole-like crimson runes were dancing around the threads of light, all of which were giving off a glacial aura. In the blink of an eye, the 4 subsidiary city lords had been tied up from head to toe by these threads of crimson light, and the glacial power within the threads of light instantly seeped into their bodies, immobilizing them once again. A pleased look appeared in EQI's eyes upon seeing this, and he returned to what he was doing before. The light radiating from the 5 statues grew brighter and brighter, and more threads of crimson light emerged, forming 4 giant crimson cocoons around the subsidiary city lords in the blink of an eye. A look of despair instantly appeared in the eyes of Fang Chan and the others upon seeing this. The fates of your city lords are sealed, so you should all just surrender to spare yourselves of unnecessary suffering, Shiao Wang sneered. A cold look flashed through Fang Chan's eyes as he pounced forward once again, and before long, the battle between the 2 sides resumed. Meanwhile, EQI sliced his own finger open, then began inscribing runes onto the air before him. A series of crimson runes that were roughly a foot in size took shape under his fingertip, then drifted away before fusing into different parts of the surrounding formation. More lines began to appear on the Weeping Blood formation, and in the blink of an eye, it had become far more complex than before, once again. At this point, EQI's complexion was looking a little pale, and it seemed that setting up this massive formation had been quite a taxing endeavor for him, but his eyes were glowing with elation as he made one final hand seal. The entire formation instantly began to glow brightly at his behest, releasing a thick pillar of crimson light that encompassed the door of light at the bottom of the pond. A burst of thunderous rumbling began to ring out from within the door of light, following which a burst of viscous crimson light shot out of it. The burst of crimson light was as viscous as blood, and there were many black impurities within it, but it was giving off tremendous bloodline power, even more so than the blood in the pond from before. The burst of crimson light seemed to be rather reluctant to conform, but in the end, it was unable to resist the Weeping Blood formation and fused into the latter. The entire formation instantly began to glow even brighter, and instead of dissipating after entering the formation, the burst of viscous light flowed through it like a crimson python, making its way over to the crimson cocoon that Fu Jian was in before vanishing into it in a flash. Radiant light instantly erupted out of the crimson cocoon, while countless crimson runes danced over its surface, and the aura that the cocoon was giving off began to fluctuate violently. In the next instant, the burst of viscous crimson light emerged from the back of the cocoon before continuing onward. Much of the black impurities within it had been eradicated, as if it had undergone some type of purification process. EQI was very pleased to see this, and the burst of viscous light roamed over to the crimson cocoon that Sun Tu was in at his behest before vanishing into it. Before long, the burst of crimson light re-emerged from the back of the cocoon once again, this time with even fewer impurities within it. After that, it passed through Chen Yang and Qin Yuan's cocoons as well, and after 4 bouts of purification, all of the black impurities within it had faded away. EQI made a beckoning motion with an elated look on his face, and the purified burst of crimson light quickly made its way over to him before vanishing into his body. After the crimson light entered his body, EQI shuddered as a pained look appeared on his face, but it was quickly overshadowed by an expression of elation as he closed his eyes and channeled his cultivation arts to harness the power within the crimson light. His limbs began to swell up slightly while also glowing with radiant crimson light, and the indistinct profound acupoints on his body were rapidly attaining substantial forms one after another. This rate of profound acupoint attainment was several times faster than what was achieved by absorbing the blood within the pond. More and more crimson light continued to surge incessantly out of the door of light before being purified by the 4 subsidiary city lords, following which it was absorbed by EQ. In what seemed like no more than the blink of an eye, he had already opened over 20 profound acupoints, and his aura was also becoming more and more immense, hanging over everyone like an all-encompassing cloud. In contrast, the auras of the 4 subsidiary city lords began to gradually wane. Meanwhile, a battle was still raging around the formation. Fang Chan was standing behind the statue that Sun Tu was situated on, and there was a ferocious look on his face, giving him the appearance of a fearsome beast. He let loose one thunderous roar after another, sending powerful sound waves sweeping toward the statue, only for them to be kept out by the crimson light barrier around the formation. The surface of the light barrier was rippling incessantly in the face of the sound waves, and before long, the entire light barrier was beginning to look a little unstable. A hint of surprise flashed through Shiao Wang's eyes upon seeing this. According to EQI, none of the cultivators outside of the 5 city lords aside from Mistress Liu Hua and Shiao Wang should have been able to pose any threat to this crimson light barrier, yet it seemed like Fang Chan was doing just that. Several seconds later, the rippling of the crimson light barrier gradually subsided. On the other side, the bandages around Duan Tong's right arm had already been unraveled, revealing a series of strange black patterns on his enormous arm. He let loose a thunderous roar as he sprang up into the air, then threw a punch down at the crimson light barrier. All of the black patterns on his arm lit up, and his already massive arm bulged even further as close to 100 profound acupoints appeared over its surface. The black patterns on his arm grew brighter and brighter, releasing waves of scorching heat as it accumulated more and more power. Duan Tong came swooping down with a look of single-minded determination and ferocity on his face, sending his fist crashing down upon the statue before him with all his might. Right at this moment, Zhu Ziyuan sprang up into the air, appearing directly in front of Duan Tong in a flash before thrusting his bone spear through the air. A sharp screeching sound rang out as the tip of Zhu Yuan's spear struck Duan Tong's fist, and formidable shockwaves erupted in all directions in the form of gusts of fierce wind. Zhu Ziyuan's bone spear was forced back to the point that its tip had almost completely folded over itself, and he gave a cold harumph as he grabbed tightly onto his spear with both hands. At the same time, dozens of profound acupoints lit up over his arms in unison, while the star acupoints on the bone spear also began glowing radiantly. A burst of tremendous starpower erupted out of his body before gushing into the spear along his arms, and the tip of the spear was instantly bolstered, returning to its original form. Duan Tong was sent flying back by the force of the tip of Zhu Ziyuan's bone spear springing back to its original orientation, and after landing on the ground, he immediately launched himself forward once again without any delay while swinging his fist as Zhai Ziyuan. A battle immediately commenced between the two, and Zhu Ziqing was just about to go and back up her brother when she spotted Xuanyuan Xing attacking the crimson light barrier from another direction. Her brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and after a brief hesitation, she chose to engage Xuanyuan Xing in battle instead. All the while, Shi Chuankong was looking on with tightly furrowed brows, seemingly very hesitant about how to proceed. Prior to his departure, Han Li had told him to do his best to remain a passive bystander, but it was clear that the Shiao Wang's trio had gained the upper hand here. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before Fang Chan and the others were defeated, at which point he would be all on his own and more vulnerable than ever. Mistress Liu Hua had also remained a passive bystander this entire time, making no effort to damage the formation, or oppose the subordinates of the four subsidiary city lords. Instead, all he did was remain standing on the spot with a grim expression, and it was unclear what he was thinking. Meanwhile, the elder from Profound End City, by the name of Lu Gang, was also attempting to damage the formation, but to no effect. Right at this moment, another thunderous roar rang out as Fang Chan stomped his feet down onto the ground to adopt a horse stance, shattering the stone slabs beneath his feet in the process. He clenched his fists tightly, and veins bulged on his forehead as he let loose a pained roar. Immediately thereafter, the muscles on his body began to rapidly bulge, and tufts of coarse black fur appeared over his skin as his body swelled up like a balloon. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a half-human, half-boar creature, and his eyes had turned bright red. At the same time, his aura had also swelled drastically, and no one dared to get close to him. "I didn't know that you possessed a true spirit bloodline," Shiao Wang mused as his eyes narrowed slightly, and even Mistress Liu Hua had turned to look at Fang Chan with a surprised look in his eyes. Shi Chuankong was also quite surprised to hear this, but it only took him a single glance to determine that this was definitely not some true spirit bloodline. Instead, he was using some type of secret technique to stimulate his own devilish bloodline in order to achieve this transformation. After completing his transformation, Fang Chan sprang up into the air, then inhaled deeply before letting loose another resounding roar. The sound waves coming out of Fang Chan's mouth were more powerful than ever before, and they crashed against the crimson light barrier like gusts of ferocious wind. The light barrier trembled violently, and a deep indentation appeared on its surface under the force of the tremendous sound waves, looking as if it really were about to be overwhelmed. A look of urgency finally appeared on Shiao Wang's face upon seeing this, and he abruptly vanished from the spot, then instantly reappeared behind Fang Chan before reaching out to grab at him from behind. Fang Chan made no effort to defend himself as he continued to roar with all his might, trying to break the crimson light barrier in one fell swoop. Inside the Weeping Blood formation, EQI took a glance in his direction, following which a cold sneer appeared on his face as he casually made a hand seal. A burst of crimson light instantly surged out of the wings of the stone statue beneath him, before fusing into the crimson light barrier, instantly restoring it to its former condition. A look of despair appeared in Fang Chan's eyes upon seeing this, and before he could do anything else, he was dealt a heavy blow on the back. White light was radiating from Shiao Wang's arm as his fingers pierced into Fang Chan's back like 5 sharp swords, sending blood splattering in all directions. Fang Chan plummeted to the ground in a puddle of his own blood before falling completely still, and it was unclear whether he was dead or alive. A grim look appeared on Shi Chuankong's face upon seeing this, and right at this moment, EQI ordered, "Kill all of these annoying pests. I don't want any more distractions from them." "Yes, City Lord E," Shiao Wang replied in a respectful manner, and he took a glance at Fang Chan, then turned his gaze toward Shi Chuankong and Lu Gang. After witnessing Fang Chan's failed attempt to breach the crimson light barrier, Lu Gang's heart had already sunk into the pits of despair, and he shuddered at the sight of Shiao Wang's hawk-like gaze before rushing back toward the 3 stone arch bridges that they had come from. "You're not going anywhere," Shiao Wang sneered as he set off in pursuit. Over 160 profound acupoints had already lit up over the elder's body, but his speed couldn't even hold a candle to Shiao Wang's, and the gap between the two of them was closed before he could even reach the stone bridges. Right as Shiao Wang's fingers were about to pierce into his back, Lu Gang suddenly stopped cold in his tracks, then swiveled around before thrusting a white dagger at Shiao Wang. All of a sudden, he was displaying far superior speed than when he was fleeing toward the stone bridges, so even Shiao Wang was caught slightly off guard. However, instead of taking any evasive measures, Shiao Wang merely gave a cold harumph as a layer of white starlight appeared over his fingers, and grabbed directly at the oncoming dagger with his bare hand. A sharp clang rang out as the space within the palm of Shiao Wang's hand warped slightly, and the dagger was instantly snapped upon entering the warped space. Taking advantage of this brief window of respite, Lu Gang darted back in retreat, but instead of continuing to flee, he leaped straight over Shiao Wang before landing beside Shi Chuankong. At this moment, the severely wounded Fang Chan was laying at Shi Chuankong's feet, and the latter was in the process of feeding the former a bright red pill. "Well done, Elder Lu," Shi Chuankong praised as he rose to his feet. "So you instructed him to lure me away in order to buy you time to save Fang Chan, is that right?" Shiao Wang asked in a cold voice. "City Lord Yi is clearly intent on killing all of us, so we have no choice but to band together," Shi Chuankong replied. "You may have managed to fool me this time, but you're only delaying the inevitable. Even if you combine your powers, it won't amount to anything." Yin Xiao sneered with a sinister grin on his face. He then reached behind himself with both hands, putting on a pair of white bone claws that were riddled with dozens of glowing star acupoints, clearly indicating that it was a star artifact of a very high caliber. At the same time, one profound acupoint after another lit up over his body, only stopping once the total count had reached 283. Grim looks appeared on the faces of both Shi Chuankong and Lu Gang upon seeing this. 283 profound acupoints was a number that placed Shiao Wang on the same level as the 4 subsidiary city lords. In fact, he already outstripped the likes of Qin Yuan. Right at this moment, Fang Chan's immobile body began to stir slightly, and before long he had struggled to his feet. Wisps of crimson mist were rising up from the gruesome wound on his back, and the flesh around the wound was rapidly healing at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye. At the same time, he rose up several dozen more feet in height, and black scales began to appear over his chest, shoulders, and neck, making him appear no different from a fearsome scaled beast. "What did you feed him just now?" Shiao Wang asked as his brows furrowed slightly. "It's called a blood-tide pill. I'm not sure if you would have heard of it before," Shi Chuankong replied with a smile. The blood-tide pill had been given to him by Shi Pakong, so there was a chance that it was meant to harm him rather than help him, just like that jade pendant, but with Fang Chan on the verge of death, he had no choice but to feed it to him. For the moment, it seemed like the pill was working as intended. In fact, it was proving to be far more effective than Shi Chuankong anticipated. "So it's just a pill that temporarily stimulates his bloodline power. I should have known that you wouldn't have anything good up your sleeve," Shiao Wang sneered, then abruptly vanished from the spot. Shi Chuankong was already prepared, and he raised the purple staff in his hands before sweeping it through the air to his side. A sharp screeching sound rang out as 2 sets of sharp bone claws raked over its surface, raising several trails of sparks in the process. Shiao Wang flew back in retreat, and upon steadying himself, he cast his gaze toward the staff in Shi Chuankong's hands with a surprised look in his eyes. Right at this moment, a giant shadow loomed over his head, and Fang Chan came swooping down upon him while swatting a massive hand down at his head. Shiao Wang was just barely able to evade the attack, and the ground that had been beneath his feet just a moment ago was completely pulverized amid a resounding boom, creating a huge crack that extended all the way to the crimson light barrier. Before he had a chance to steady himself, Lu Gang pounced at him from behind, holding a glowing white dagger that he pierced directly at the back of Shiao Wang's head. Shiao Wang harumphed coldly as he placed one hand behind his own hand to protect himself while making a tugging motion with his other hand. The bone claw on his latter hand immediately began to glow with radiant starlight, releasing a burst of formidable tearing force that caused the space behind him to warp and twist. Lu Gang was drawn involuntarily toward Shiao Wang by this burst of tearing force, and he hurriedly began to backpedal in an alarmed manner, only managing to stop himself in his tracks after his feet had sunk deep into the ground. However, before he even had a chance to catch his breath, Shiao Wang had already swung around to attack him. Thankfully, Shi Chuankong and Fang Chan had also already arrived on the scene, and the three of them joined forces to oppose Shiao Wang. On the other side, Xuanyuan Xing possessed a slight cultivation base advantage over Zhu Ziking, but the latter's bone armor and bone spear were all extremely formidable star artifact, thereby bridging the gap between them, so it was unclear who was going to come out on top between the two. At the same time, Zhu Ziyuan and Duan Tong were also locked in a fierce battle against each other, one that was fraught with peril. Countless dark purple runes had appeared over Duan Tong's exposed skin, and they were all giving off bursts of scorching heat. Plumes of black mist began to rise up from his body as the heat became more and more intense, forming a black cloud around him that made it impossible to gauge the number of profound acupoints on his body. After forcing back Duan Tong with his spear, Zhu Ziyuan darted back to open up some distance between the two of them as a wary look appeared in his eyes. "Looks like you've made significant strides since the previous 5-city martial gathering," Zhu Ziyuan mused. "I was planning to even the score with Gu Kaiengsun, but you're the one who has to face the result of my last 1,000 years of training now," Duan Tong replied in a cold voice. Zhu Ziyuan took a glance at his sister out of his peripheral vision to see how she was faring in her battle, and Duan Tong was furious to see this. "How dare you get distracted when you're facing me?" he roared as he launched himself at Zhu Ziyuan while swinging his right fist through the air. His right fist was extraordinarily massive to begin with, and now that it was enshrouded in black mist, it resembled a devilish black lion biting down upon Zhu Ziyuan's head. Zhu Ziyuan turned his attention back to Duan Tong, then swung his spear upward, and a ball of white starlight emerged over the tip of the spear to clash against Duan Tong's right fist. As the ball of white light clashed against the black mist, it resembled a resplendent sun piercing into a dark cloud, and the black mist churned violently while rapidly evaporating to reveal Duan Tong's fist once again. However, it was no longer clenched into a fist. Instead, he had grabbed tightly onto the tip of Zhu Ziyuan's spear. Zhu Ziyuan was holding the shaft of his spear with both hands as he hoisted it upward, and a series of star acupoints lit up over the spear in rapid succession, releasing dazzling white light that spilled through the gaps between Duan Tong's fingers. Even so, Duan Tong still refused to release the spear, and he allowed himself to be hoisted up into the air by Zhu Ziyuan. Right at this moment, a vast expanse of crimson light suddenly erupted out the runes on Duan Tong's arm, while plumes of dense mist surged out of the palm of his hand, drifting toward Zhu Ziyuan like a nest of snakes. Zhu Ziyuan's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he tightened his grip around the shaft of his spear, upon which a burst of tremendous starpour erupted out of its star acupoints in unison to dispel the oncoming plumes of mist. However, before he had a chance to do anything else, a loud crack suddenly rang out from the tip of his spear. He hurriedly cast his gaze toward the tip of the spear to discover that it seemed to have already completely decomposed. Not only had it turned a corrupted, black color, it had shattered all the way from its tip to its shaft. Zhu Ziyuan was just about to dart back in retreat when he suddenly felt his entire body go stiff, and an alarmed look appeared in his eyes. "Crap, this is paralysis death poison." All of a sudden, he felt as if his legs had been filled with lead, and even the slightest movement had become an extremely arduous feat. "I've already refined paralysis death poison into my arm, so your fate was sealed from the very beginning," Duan Tong roared as he threw a punch at Zhu Ziyuan, and his giant right fist came crashing down with tremendous power. An alarmed look appeared on Zhu Ziking's face as she saw this unfold from afar, and in her moment of distraction, she was struck by a blow to the shoulder from Xuanyuan Xing. The bone armor on her shoulder was instantly shattered, and she was sent flying like a rucksack. A furious look appeared in Zhu Ziyuan's eyes upon seeing this, and all of the profound acupoints on his body lit up as he somehow mustered up the strength required to swivel around and evade Duan Tong's fist. In the heat of battle, no one had noticed that all of the yellow clouds in the sky were currently converging toward the hall from all directions, as if they had been herded here by some type of mystical force. Under the all-encompassing blanket of yellow clouds, the entire area in a radius of dozens of kilometers around the hall had been plunged into complete darkness. The layer of clouds in the sky was only continuing to grow thicker and denser, and they gradually formed a giant vortex, at the center of which was a black hole that was looking down at the hall below like a giant eye. Thick arcs of lightning were flashing incessantly within the vortex amid bursts of dull rumbling, and before long, the vortex had swelled to an enormous size. Furthermore, there was a burst of devastating power accumulating within it, seemingly waiting for an opportunity to erupt. Inside the hall, the 4 subsidiary city lords in the Weeping Blood formation were slumped over their stone statues, and all of them were trembling uncontrollably, while their complexions had turned deathly pale. It seemed like all of them had already given up hope, and they weren't even bothering to try and resist anymore. All of a sudden, Han Li silently appeared on one of the stone arch bridges leading deeper into the darkness, but instead of immediately revealing himself, he carefully concealed his own aura to observe the unfolding scene from afar. The first thing that he noticed was that something had clearly gone awry in the Weeping Blood formation, and that the 4 subsidiary city lords were all in terrible condition. Before he had a chance to analyze the situation, his attention was drawn to Lu Gang, who had just failed to land a sneak attack on Shiao Wang, only for the latter to pounce on the opportunity to retaliate and pierce both sets of bone claws into his chest. Shiao Wang then brought his hands apart, and Lu Gang's entire body was torn into 2 amid a blood-curdling howl. Before his nascent soul had a chance to escape, it was also torn to shreds by a swipe from Shiao Wang's claws. Fang Chan let loose a thunderous roar upon seeing this, sending powerful sound waves sweeping toward Shiao Wang, but the latter merely darted away to the side to evade the attack before rushing directly at Shi Chuankong.